Chapter 1055. Minor success in the Tao of Fire. After Yi Zichen pushed the flames away, they didn't disappear. Instead, they burned even more fiercely. The flames seemed to want to swallow him whole. Waves of heat washed over him, causing him to sweat profusely. In his dreams, he ran madly until... Sniff! Yi Zichen's nose twitched. As he sprinted through his dreams, he seemed to smell the scent of roast meat. Naturally, a plate of steaming roast chicken appeared in his dreams. His mouth watered uncontrollably. Even though the flames were right in front of him, he had to snatch the roast chicken from the flames. That damned bastard! Shui Honghong rushed to the woodshed and looked at the raging flames. Her heart burned with fury, and she gnashed her teeth so hard that they creaked. Some of her attendants had already taken to the skies and started raining rain. However, these weren't ordinary flames, they were magical flames. Ordinary rain wouldn't affect them in the slightest. "Fetch the sea of innocence," shouted Shui Honghong from outside. She scanned her surroundings a few times, but discovered that the fellow she'd locked up in the woodshed wasn't outside. "Control the flames. Don't let them spread. I'm going to take a look." "First, miss." Shui Honghong ignored her attendants and servants. She silently muttered an incantation, and a fiery red light ignited around her. She kicked the woodshed's wooden door, smashed it to pieces, and barged in. The fire in the woodshed burned far more intensely than outside. Even Shui Honghong found it hard to endure the waves of heat that assaulted her senses. She felt as if all the water and essence in her body were about to evaporate into nothingness. "Hey, are you still there?" The thick black smoke made it impossible for her to open her eyes. All she could do was frantically circulate her spiritual energy to separate herself from the flames. However, the flames were simply too hot. All she could do was carefully move around in places where the flames hadn't yet reached. "Chicken drumstick, my chicken drumstick." A delirious murmur rang out from within the blazing firewood shed. Clearly, it was about to recede in the heat of the flames. When Shui Honghong heard this, she steeled her heart and dove into the sea of flames. "Chicken drumstick." Yi Zichen lay on the straw mat, drooling. To Shui Honghong's astonishment, even though the flames had swallowed up the entire woodshed, Yi Zichen wasn't affected in the slightest. Even the straw mat he was lying on was completely undamaged. When Shui Honghong saw that Yi Zichen hadn't been injured, she instinctively sighed in relief. Of course, it wasn't that she was worried about Yi Zichen's safety. It was purely because he'd locked her up in the woodshed, and she didn't want to see him die there. If he was somewhere else, he wouldn't care if he died or not. When she saw Yi Zichen's strange behavior in the woodshed, Shui Honghong was certain that the fire had something to do with him. Otherwise, why would he be completely fine? This guy was a scourge. Shui Honghong gnashed her teeth and cursed, then looked at Yi Zichen, who was still asleep and drooling. She directly kicked him, still sleeping. "Chicken! Chicken!" The kick woke Yi Zichen up with a start. He yelled and scrambled to his feet. When he saw the raging flames in the woodshed, he calmly sat back down, a hint of pleasant surprise in his eyes. "I've achieved initial success in the Tao of the 5 elements. I never would have guessed I'd break through in my sleep. I really am a genius. I've converted my immortal spiritual power to divine spiritual power by more than 30%. Once I reach initial success in the Tao of the 5 elements, my divine spiritual power should be complete as well." Just as he was feeling smug about himself, he sensed a bone-piercing cold in the middle of the flames. Through the raging flames, he saw Shui Honghong standing there, eyeing him coldly. Fire! In an instant, Yi Zichen's previously smug expression was filled with panic. He curled up like a frightened rabbit, gulped, and looked at the flames around him. He'd started the fire. There was no way he could escape. Was he supposed to pat himself on the chest and say, "I started the fire, so I'll bear all the damage"? That's impossible, not to mention anything else. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to make up for the loss, even if he sold himself. Just now, he'd secretly used his immortal awareness to take a look. It wasn't just the woodshed that was on fire. Practically the entire backyard was on fire. He absolutely couldn't take the blame for this. If he did, he'd die here for the rest of his life. Honey, even if you wanted to kill me, you didn't have to set me on fire, did you? Hey, wait, you're here too. Could it be that your family doesn't want us to be together? Do you want to die with me? I don't want to. I haven't lived long enough. I haven't seen the God Realm's great rivers and mountains. I still have too many unfulfilled wishes. I can't die here. It could be said that Yi Zichen had perfectly displayed the despair and unwillingness of someone on the verge of death. If Shui Honghong didn't know who he really was, she really might have been fooled by his acting. Don't play the fool here. Hurry up and tell me how to put out the fire. The flames are too fierce. Even though I've already sent everyone to fetch water from the Sea of Innocence, it'll be very difficult to put them out. How could I possibly know? You're not suspecting me, are you? She wanted him to take the blame? No way. Yi Zichen was determined to play dumb until the very end. In any case, there was no lie detector, nor were there any criminal psychologists to interrogate him. As long as he didn't admit it, who could say he was the culprit? After all, he was a victim of the flames. Shui Honghong was furious. Although she was in the woodshed, her immortal awareness kept an eye on the situation outside. The flames spread with the wind, and the entire residence was now engulfed in a sea of flames. The servants and attendants had brought water from the Sea of Innocence, but it didn't have much effect on the flames. Come with me. It was hard to imagine what kind of internal struggle Shui Honghong had gone through. In the end, she'd still decided to save Yi Zichen. Even Yi Zichen, who was standing on the straw mat, was stunned by this choice. He looked at Shui Honghong, who disregarded the fact that he was her benefactor, attacked him, and locked him in the woodshed. Yi Zichen's expression was one of stubbornness. Yi Zichen's resistance to her softened somewhat. Chapter 10:56. Instructor Yi teaches you how to pick up a girl. What's going on? What are the servants doing here? How do they start a fire like this? The towering flames startled Elder Che. He grabbed one of the attendants who'd been carrying buckets of water to put out the fire. I don't know how the fire started either, but the first miss said it's no ordinary fire. It's the Tao of the 5 elements flames, so she told us to bring some water to put it out. However, the fire's too strong. The water we've brought isn't even enough to put out the fire. The attendant carrying the buckets looked distressed. Water couldn't be stored in spatial artifacts, so they could only bring buckets by buckets from the Sea of Innocence's river. Even though they were human immortals and could fly, the river was too far away. Even if they didn't dare slack off in the slightest, they couldn't put out the fire as quickly as it spread. Needless to say, the servants weren't even at the spiritual body level. If they wanted to fetch water, they had to run around on foot. They were practically negligible. Hovering in the air, Elder Che furrowed his brows. These flames were undoubtedly magical fire. However, the only fire attribute cultivator in their group was the first Mississippi. She still had the master's precious treasures, so there was no way she'd cause such a ruckus. So who was it? How dare they set fire to the Skyspan Trading Company? Where's the first miss? The attendant with the buckets licked his lips, a hint of worry in his eyes. She went into the woodshed. What? Elder Che's expression darkened. He waved his sleeves and shouted, Nonsense! Nonsense! How could you let the first miss fall into such danger? Wait, that's just an ordinary woodshed. Why would she go there? She didn't listen to us at all. It seems she's still locked up in the woodshed. She went in to save the man we captured on the ancient path, replied the attendant. In an instant, Elder Che's expression turned extremely ugly. Her love affair had reached this point. The clan had chosen so many geniuses for her, but she'd never taken a liking to any of them. He never would have guessed she'd become so enamored with the lower land's disciple. He hadn't seen anything special about that youth either. Why would the first miss take a liking to him? Although he felt indignant towards Shui Honghong, she was still the clan's pearl. Her status was exalted, and he couldn't allow anything to happen to her. Tell the firefighters to get out of the way. I'll use the Sea of Innocence to put out the fire. As soon as those words were spoken, Elder Che raised his hands. An azure light flickered in his palm, and the moment this light appeared, the moisture in the air began to gather around him. Several kilometers away, the sea of innocence's waterway trembled, and a water dragon soared into the air with a rumble. The water dragon was like the source of the river. It brought with it the entire river's worth of innocence's seawater. With a roar, it flew to the backyard of the mansion and turned into a great storm that poured down. If he wanted to move a woman, simply talking wouldn't have much of an effect. Yi Zichen held Xue Honghong's hands tightly. His gaze shifted, and he saw that one of the beams above Xue Honghong's head had been charred black. The material is so good that the house didn't collapse. Yi Zichen muttered to himself. He hesitated for a moment, then, while Xue Honghong wasn't paying attention, flicked his finger at the charred beam. He did it on purpose. The charred beam couldn't bear the weight of the house and collapsed. Be careful. Seeing that the woodshed was on the verge of collapse, Yi Zichen retreated so Xue Honghong wouldn't notice. Yi Zichen pulled her into his arms, then used his back to block the burning wooden plank. Then he hurriedly reversed the flow of his blood. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, which landed directly on Xue Honghong's face. Get to the point. The blood he spat on Xue Honghong's face was the key. He couldn't spit it onto the ground, nor could he not. Only when it sprayed on her face would she have the most intuitive feeling. You got hurt because of her. But that wasn't all. He needed to say some loving words to shatter her last line of defense. Trust me. He hugged Xue Honghong tightly. His voice was weak, and blood dripped from the corners of his mouth. If I'm still alive, I'll definitely go to your clan and ask for your hand in marriage. I'll officially marry you. Even Xue Honghong was a bit dazed by this scene. He'd sworn such a sincere oath under these circumstances. Suddenly, under the illumination of this sea of fire, this guy that she hated the most actually made her feel a bit taller. It seems like it worked. Once we get out of here, he shouldn't bother me anymore, right? Yi Zichen noticed Xue Honghong's slightly dazed expression, but he didn't dare relax in the slightest. He maintained his sincere, yet weak appearance. Go. You have to survive. Hey, get to the point. Why did he have to push Xue Honghong away now? Yi Zichen had long since seen through Elder Che's actions. Right now, he had to portray himself as someone who'd given up all hope of survival, someone who didn't care about his own life and death. This was all part of his plan. As expected, when Yi Zichen pushed Xue Honghong away, her last line of defense crumbled. She stared blankly at Yi Zichen, who just pushed her away. Her emotions were indescribably complex. Although the flames threatened him, they couldn't truly harm him. Even if the firewood fell, she'd been able to dodge and advance. Yi Zichen's actions seemed superfluous, but to her, she was deeply moved. Xue Honghong couldn't help but recall their earlier bickering. Back then, she'd only thought of him as someone with no ability to talk back. But after this scene, could it be that this was the real him? Whoosh! Just as Xue Honghong's emotions were incomparably complex, rain poured down from above. The raindrops fell on the flames, and not long after, the raging flames were completely extinguished. Almost instinctively, Xue Honghong ran to Yi Zichen's side when she saw the flames extinguish. We don't have to die. Your injuries, are they all right? She was still young and immature. It was obvious that she was a naive little flower with little emotional experience. Just look at her. She was already worried about her injuries. Everything was under control. Since things had come this far, Yi Zichen naturally couldn't let all his previous efforts go to waste. Huh, that's great. I survived. My injuries are fine. They're just minor injuries. Don't worry. Once we get out, I'll definitely pay a visit to your family and propose marriage. I'll officially marry you. Crooked neck. He fell into Xue Honghong's arms. Perfect. The instant Yi Zichen lost consciousness, Xue Honghong screamed, her face covered in soot. Chapter 1057. Chapter 1057. Bloodline awakening. Yi Zichen collapsed into Xue Honghong's arms. He couldn't help but feel bitter inside. From start to finish, everything had gone well. It was just that lecture at the end that made him feel terrible. He couldn't blame her. After all, the two of them hadn't even exchanged names. On the whole, it was perfect. When the roof collapsed, Elder Che and his subordinates' hearts pounded. That was especially true of the scream from inside the woodshed. They were terrified that something would happen to Shui Hong Hong in the sea of flames. As the flames subsided, some of the people outside ran in. First Mississippi, Shui Hong Hong's crimson clothes glowed with light. She was obviously wearing an extraordinary protective artifact. As the sea of flames burned, her face was covered in soot. She held Yi Zichen, who was pretending to be dead, tightly in her arms. Step by step, she made her way outside. Out of the way. Shui Hong Hong's expression was grave. Her subordinates didn't dare disobey. They hurriedly made way. When they saw Yi Zichen in her arms, the attendants' expressions grew strange. First Miss, what are you doing? When he saw this, Elder Che knit his brows and roared in anger. Shui Hong Hong was an unmarried young lady, yet she was holding a man in her arms. What was going on? Out of the way. She spoke in that same unquestionable tone. Elder Che was just about to say something, but suddenly felt an oppressive pressure that made it hard for him to breathe. Suddenly, he looked at the space between Shui Hong Hong's brows and saw a golden flame slowly burning in the center of her brows. Bloodline awakening. This was the unique power of Shui Hong Hong's family's bloodline. It was a special ability possessed by all peak bloodlines of the god race. The earlier one awakened their bloodline, the greater their talent. Mortal, profound, Earth Sky King. Normally, their clan's bloodline awakened before the age of 16. For example, Shui Bebe had awakened her bloodline when she was 9. A heaven-grade bloodline. Her talent was so shocking that even the clan's elders fought over her to accept her as a disciple. Shui Hong Hong was an anomaly. Ever since she was a child, she displayed cultivation talent that far surpassed her peers. Quite a few of the clan's elders were certain that she'd be the first to awaken her bloodline, and that she'd have a heaven-grade bloodline at the very least. To everyone's surprise, even after her 16th birthday, her bloodline hadn't awakened. Gradually, the people in the clan lost interest in her. No matter how amazing she was in the past, if she did not awaken her bloodline, her future achievements would be limited. She'd left the Divine Mountains and gone to the 72 districts and taken over the clan's Skyspan trading company. This kind of decision was actually not much different from being abandoned by the clan. However, what was even more surprising was that even though she had not awakened her bloodline, her cultivation speed was getting faster and faster. He had become a celestial immortal at the age of 19. He was considered one of the 100 people who had become a celestial immortal before the age of 20, and all of them had awakened their bloodline before the age of 12, and their bloodline was above the Earth rank. Shui Hong Hong was now 24 years old and a mid-stage sky immortal. Even though it seemed slow to advance to the mid-stage, heavenly immortal stage in 5 years, one must know that an ordinary person might not even be able to take a step forward in 10 years. More importantly, she had awakened her bloodline at the age of 24. Elder Che, who was standing in front of Shui Hong Hong, was so shocked that he was speechless. Her bloodline awakening at the age of 24 meant that she had broken the norm that had been passed down for millions of years. Furthermore, the flame on her forehead was golden. Common grade was white, mystic grade was red, earth grade was blue, and heaven grade was purple. A legendary king grade bloodline. A legendary king grade bloodline. If it really was a king grade bloodline, then he couldn't control her as an outer managing elder. Not to mention him, even the elders in the clan would not dare to say a word of no to her. Out of the way, another deep rebuke rang out. This time, Elder Che didn't dare tarry. He hurriedly stepped aside and bowed deeply to Shui Hong Hong. First Miss, please. She indifferently walked over to the spot that Elder Che had opened up for her, but she stopped after taking a few steps. She indifferently glanced at Elder Che, who was still bowing deeply as golden flames burned in her eyes. Have the clan send the best doctors and the best life-prolonging pills to see me. Yes. When he saw the golden flames, Elder Che's heart trembled. He bowed respectfully, and Shui Hong Hong floated away, not bothering to look at him. Only when Shui Hong Hong was out of sight did Elder Che straighten up. By now, his forehead was drenched in sweat. The pressure was simply too strong. Even though she was a great circle heavenly immortal, she still felt extremely strained under this pressure. This was the pressure of a king-grade bloodline. You. Suppressing his shock, Elder Che frowned at his subordinates and shouted, "I'll be returning to the clan in a moment. I will return to the clan in a while. From now on, you must ensure the safety of the 1st Miss and the 3rd Mississippi. Even if you die, you must not let the 1st Miss get hurt, not even a drop of blood or a strand of hair. Do you understand?" Even if his subordinates didn't know what had happened, they all sensed the gravity of the situation. "Yes, sir." Elder Che glanced at his subordinates, then spared no expense of his lifespan. He left several seals in the courtyard, then took out a jade pendant, crushed it, and vanished from the world. Creak. Yi Zichen was still lying in Shui Honghong's arms, playing dead. When he heard the sound of a door, he felt himself land on a soft bed. He stealthily inhaled a few breaths of the air around him. The entire room was filled with a faint fragrance. This arousing fragrance was no different from Shui Honghong's. "I'm actually lying in that woman's bed." Yi Zichen was astonished, but he didn't dare let it show. He was currently playing dead, so he absolutely couldn't let the cat out of the bag. However, just now he seemed to have heard Shui Honghong send for the best doctor and the best pills. Pills were no problem. Eating them would definitely be harmless. But if the doctor came, wouldn't the cat be out of the bag? He had to find an opportunity to come back from the dead. He'd gone to great lengths to put on this show. If a doctor ruined it, he'd lose more than he'd gained. What he couldn't understand was this. Even if that woman really wanted to save him, there's no need to go this far, was there? She'd even brought him to her bedroom. Could it be that she'd truly fallen in love with him? Or perhaps it was just as he'd said. The moment they'd first met, she'd already secretly fallen for him. She wanted to use this opportunity to... How could he allow her to ruin his reputation like that? But then he thought about it. He was currently playing dead. If he resisted, he'd be exposed. Forget it. If he really couldn't do it, he'd just give in to her. He was a man, after all. A true hero was someone who could bow and submit when necessary. However, he hadn't expected Shui Honghong's voice to come at this moment. Chapter 1058. A 10-year promise. Yi Zichen's heart trembled, but his expression didn't betray it. He continued to play dead. Shui Honghong stood by the window and looked at Yi Zichen, who still hadn't reacted. She couldn't help but sigh, then inexplicably smiled at him. When she looked back and smiled, 100 beauties bloomed. She was probably talking about her. Her smile was both charming and seductive, as if shrouded in mist and water. The corners of her exquisite lips curled up slightly, and her red lips parted slightly, inviting a kiss. This was a woman who radiated seductiveness from the very core of her being. Her every frown tugged at men's nerves. However, this kind of seductive beauty usually kept a straight face and used her most domineering methods to maintain the Skyspan Trading Company's business. It was only when she was alone that she would smile at herself in the mirror and praise how beautiful she was. "You're really special, so special that I really want to get to know you." Shui Honghong didn't care at all that Yi Zichen was lying on the bed, pretending to be asleep. Perhaps it was more accurate to say that she didn't know if he was really unconscious or just pretending to be asleep. She simply looked at him and muttered to herself, "I've never had a particularly happy life. When I was young, I didn't know any better. I always wanted to show off in front of my elders. Back then, I just wanted their praise, but now that I'm older, I realize it's become a burden. I don't like being restricted. Every day, they urge me to do this and that. I'm really annoyed. In order to make them give up on me, I deliberately didn't awaken my bloodline power. I wanted them to be disappointed in me. That way I could relax." Sure enough, it was just as I thought. When I came of age and hadn't awakened my bloodline yet, the clansmen stopped paying attention to me. The elders stopped pushing me, so I took advantage of the opportunity to get my father to let me run the Skyspan Trading Company. That's why I ran away from the Divine Mountains. The past few years in the 72 districts have been the most comfortable I've ever been. No one's restricting me, and I'm the boss. If nothing unexpected happens, I like to live like this for the rest of my life, but what's going on? Yi Zichen lay in bed and listened carefully. Suddenly, he felt like he'd gone a little too far. Forget it. If he really had gone too far, he'd just listen to her. After all, He was a man. As a man, he had to shoulder his responsibilities. However, from what this woman said, this family seemed to be quite powerful. And that turning point just now, could it be that she was going to mention him? But we ran into each other. There was no surprise at all. It was just as Yi Zichen thought. The turning point Shui Honghong spoke of really was him. She turned around, her eyes as clear as blue waves, brimming with this faint warmth. Her eyes narrowed into a perfect crescent moon. Perhaps this was the smile of an angel. It chased away all the haze, causing the stars to lose their splendor. Our meeting was really an accident. I also know that what you said was actually a joke, or perhaps it was to provoke me. I know all of this. But in the woodshed just now, I might have taken it seriously. Gulp. Yi Zichen, who was playing dead, could no longer keep up the act. He subconsciously gulped. He truly did realize that he'd gone too far. Shui Honghong happened to see this, but she didn't expose him. Instead, she continued to smile. When I saw you faint, I was truly worried. I felt fear and unease from the bottom of my heart. I was afraid you'd die trying to save me. If that happened, I'd feel guilty for the rest of my life, and I might never be able to fall in love with anyone else. I had to save you, not just to save you, but to save myself as well. I think Elder Che revealed the power of my bloodline, a royal bloodline. He wouldn't dare disobey any of my decisions. I asked him to find the best doctor in the clan and get the best pills to save your life. The news of my bloodline awakening will also reach the clan. It won't be long before someone from the clan comes to find me and evaluate the power of my bloodline. In truth, you don't need to worry. Or perhaps I should say that your worries are useless. I won't rely on you. My dignity and my clan won't allow me to do that. You should be a celestial immortal. Perhaps for you, your current achievements are quite good. But to my clan, you're still far too lacking. Even if I took everything you said seriously, even if it's just as you said, and I've secretly fallen in love with you, we can't be together. We're not even from the same world. As she said this, Shui Honghong's expression grew bitter. In the past 20 years, this was the first time she'd felt the slightest bit of love. Sadly, the man she'd fallen for couldn't possibly be a good match for her. Especially considering her bloodline, there was no way her clan would allow her to be with a sky immortal. It wasn't just her clan, even she wouldn't make such a choice. With a royal bloodline, she was bound to become one of the top leaders of the god race. She would stand at the very peak of the world. Yi Zichen was a sky immortal now, but the gap between them would soon grow, and their horizons would gradually change. She couldn't tolerate the fact that her man was weaker than her. You're underestimating me. Yi Zichen, who'd been slamming his head against the wall for so long, couldn't keep up the act. He suddenly sat up straight, only to discover that Shui Honghong was right in front of him. Their noses were pressed together, so close they could feel each other's breath. Shui Honghong didn't dodge, but Yi Zichen stepped aside. When she saw Yi Zichen step aside, Shui Honghong felt a bit disappointed, but also inwardly rejoiced. If Yi Zichen really wanted to do something to her, she wasn't sure if she'd resist. If she really didn't, she feared she'd regret it for the rest of her life. But if he didn't even have that much courage, how could he even talk about marrying her? How difficult would it be to gain her family's approval? You're awake? Shui Honghong set aside her disappointment and smiled calmly. Yi Zichen laughed dryly, somewhat embarrassed. I admit I was pretending to be asleep, but you're going a bit too far, aren't you? I can tell from your words that you despise me. I'm just stating the facts. Of course, you can interpret it that way. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, even when it came to hurting someone. Yi Zichen took a few deep breaths, then nodded. All right, you're the daughter of a rich family. It's normal for you to despise a commoner like me. However, I hate it when people look down on me the most. So what? Did you just say you were interested in me? Yes. Shui Honghong didn't deny it. That's for the best. Instantly, Yi Zichen's expression grew solemn as well. I don't care what your family background is like. I'm marrying you. All right. Shui Honghong's expression was as calm as ever. She laughed. But I can't wait for you forever. My family won't allow it. 10 years. I can only give you 10 years. During that time, no matter what marriage partner my family arranges for me, I'll flatly refuse. But if you don't marry me after 10 years, don't blame me. I'll hate you for the rest of my life. I'll hate you for the rest of my life. All of a sudden, Yi Zichen thought of Su Yin, and his aura weakened somewhat. When Shui Honghong saw this, she assumed he was afraid. She was a bit disappointed, but then she heard him speak. I have other women. That's fine. So long as you keep your promise, I don't care. Shui Honghong's father had over a dozen wives. She'd never had any qualms about this since she was young. Experts naturally had such privileges. Chapter 1059. A Royal Bloodline, 1st Mississippi. Elder Che's respectful greeting came from outside. Shui Honghong stood by the window for a long while before she turned around and glanced longingly at the windowsill. This was where Yi Zichen had left. He hadn't said where he was going, nor had he said what he was going to do. All he'd left behind was the promise of her daughter, as well as her heart. Gaining her family's approval was easier said than done. 10 years might seem like a long time, but to cultivators, it was like the snap of a finger. She'd given him 10 years in order to make him back down, but at the same time, she'd given herself a chance. Who could say for sure whether or not a miracle would happen in the next 10 years? Even if the chances were slim, it was unlikely. Shui Honghong sighed, walked up to her room, and opened the door. Aside from Elder Che, there were 2 other sage-like elderly men standing outside the room. 1st Mississippi, when they saw Shui Honghong, the 2 old men bowed slightly to her. Elder Che carefully peered into the bedroom. "First Missy, he's already gone." She sighed in disappointment, her eyes brimming with reluctance. When he heard this, Elder Che let out a long sigh. The 2 elders by his side had different statuses than he did. They were both influential figures in the clan, especially the old man with the medicine chest. He was especially old-fashioned. If he saw Yi Zichen lying in Shui Honghong's bedroom, he'd have no choice but to tell the clan head and elders to punish her, regardless of whether or not her bloodline had awakened, or whether or not she possessed a royal bloodline. "Where's the injured?" "I'm busy with official business. After treating him, I'll have to return to the clan." I don't know what the clan head was thinking, but he sent me to such a barren place. The old man furrowed his brows. He could tell that the environment and everything here were intolerable. "Since you're not feeling well, you can return to the clan now." Ever since she was a child, Shui Honghong had never liked this old man. He always acted all high and mighty, thinking that his status was extremely high. He would bow and scrape to those who were strong, and treat those who were slightly weaker with cold eyes. He was a living snob. If it wasn't for his superb medical skills, it would be impossible for such a person to exist in his family. Shui Honghong's words immediately infuriated the old man. However, he didn't dare lose his temper because this young miss seemed to be of the King Pinjian bloodline. He could only vent his anger on Elder Che, the one who had brought him down here. "Che Yuantai, can you explain me what's going on? This old man has a myriad of things to attend to on the Divine Mountain. I don't have the time to fool around with you here." Che Yuantai, who was reprimanded, revealed an embarrassed expression. He was just an outer sect deacon elder. He couldn't compare to this kind of elder who stayed in the clan all year round. "I was the one who asked Elder Che to find a doctor in the clan, but I didn't expect to find you. I've also told you that if you're unhappy, you can go back now. Instead of wasting time arguing with us here, why don't you hurry back to the sacred mountain and do what you should be doing?" "You what?" Instantly, Shui Honghong's aloof eyes blazed with golden flames. A golden petal quietly blossomed between her brows. "So it really is a royal bloodline." The ruddy, white-haired elder who'd been silent all this time walked forward. When he heard this, the old man with the medical kit was instantly rendered speechless. A royal bloodline. Even the entire Shui family, there were no more than 3 of them. Clansmen with such a bloodline enjoyed a transcendent status in the clan. Although he'd earned a place in the Shui family thanks to his medical skills, he was still an outsider. The Shui family could hire him, but they could also remove him from the clan. This was especially true for clansmen with royal bloodlines. Even a family head had to carefully scrutinize their words and actions. They absolutely couldn't afford to provoke such a person. "Congratulations, 1st Mississippi. I could tell from the moment you were young that you were a dragon among men. When you still hadn't awakened your bloodline, even after reaching adulthood, I thought it was strange. I didn't think you'd be mediocre for the rest of your life. I never imagined that you'd actually have a royal bloodline. The heavens have taken pity on our Shwe family. Another royal bloodline clansman has been born. The old man with the medical kit was a master of sailing with the wind. When he saw that Shwe Hong Hong was confirmed to be a royal bloodline clansman, he immediately flattered her. Heh, hurry up and get back to your daily affairs. Flattery didn't work on Shwe Hong Hong. Besides, she didn't have a good impression of this old man. Back when she hadn't awakened her bloodline, even after reaching adulthood, this old man's change had been the most obvious. Now he was saying all this was bullshit. The old man with the medical kit didn't get angry at being reprimanded by a junior. His smile bloomed like a chrysanthemum, and his pea-sized eyes darted around a few times. I'll go back right now and tell the family head about First Miss Royal Bloodline. He hurried out of the room. When they saw him leave, both Shwe Hong Hong and Elder Che revealed faint disdain. Even the ruddy old man snorted calmly, as if he didn't have a good impression of the old man. After chasing away the old man with the medicine chest, the white-haired old man with a youthful complexion revealed a satisfied smile. Little Hong Hong, you really didn't disappoint me. I've made you worry. She bowed deeply to the old man. Shwe Hong Hong still remembered that when she had been sent to the 72 districts, this old man had been so angry that he had quarreled with her father. She knew that her third grandpa cared for her from the bottom of his heart. Don't worry, don't worry. Little Hong Hong has awakened a royal bloodline, so you can return to the clan now. There's no need to linger in a place with such thin, spiritual energy. Your third grandpa can already imagine your father's expression. It'll definitely be a sight to behold. The old man still seemed like a child at heart. He pursed his lips into a smile. However, when she heard about returning to the clan, Shwe Hong Hong's expression froze. She couldn't help but ask, "Must I go back?" "What, you don't want to go back?" The old man frowned. "Since you've awakened your bloodline, you'll have to return to the clan. Moreover, you have a royal bloodline, so the clan will definitely focus on nurturing you. I'm afraid that even if you return, it'll be very difficult for you to leave. However, your third grandpa will be here. If you really get tired of staying in the clan, I'll sneak you out. In any case, your father won't dare stop me." "Really?" Shwe Hong Hong's eyes lit up. Her greatest worry was that her freedom would be restricted when she returned. Now that her third grandpa had said this, she was completely at ease. "When has your third grandpa ever lied to you?" The ruddy old man reached out and tousled Shwe Hong Hong's hair. "Let's go back. If we delay any longer, the clansmen will be waiting anxiously." Shwe Hong Hong nodded solemnly when she heard this. Her gaze fell on the windowsill in the room. Chapter 1060. Under daybreaks, in tranquil moonlight, shone down on raging flame city streets. Even though it was already late at night, the rows of shops lining the streets were still brightly lit. Thanks to the Skyspan Trading Company, this place had become a bustling commercial district. Adventurers who'd just returned or were about to leave went to the weapon list to purchase weapons, talismans to talisman shops, or pill shops to buy healing and spirit-restoring pills. In short, it was bustling with activity. Yi Zichen strolled down the street, jug of alcohol in hand. He didn't stand out at all. This sort of behavior wasn't strange at all. However, he realized that among so many shops, there were only a few elixir stores. The elixirs in the elixir stores were all ordinary immortal elixirs. Most of them were spirit-returning elixirs. There weren't even as many types of elixirs as recorded in Old Supreme Elder's secret manual. Who knows? Maybe I'll be able to stay in one of these pill shops in the future. Yi Zichen's mind raced. Of course, that didn't mean he had to do everything. The money the Axe Gang's child of wealth had given him was enough for him to squander for a while. Moreover, he still remembered that he was the one who made the solemn vow. "All right, I'll remember our 10-year promise. If you want to find me, go to the Northern Divine Mountains Shwe family. My name is Shwe Hong Hong. I'll remember that. I'm marrying Shwe Hong Hong." Yi Zichen found a corner against the wall and sat down. He set the jug of alcohol aside and rubbed his temples. Why had he been so impulsive back then? Shuehonghong wouldn't really wait 10 years for him, would she? If he didn't show up by then, she'd be thoroughly disappointed in him. But if he really did go, that was the divine mountain. 10 years. Logically speaking, it would be very difficult for him to grow to a height that others could only look up to. Furthermore, Shuehonghong's family was clearly no ordinary family. No, as a man, how could he back down just like that? This was a promise he'd made to her. He couldn't just let it go. In any case, it was the northern divine mountain. When the time came, he'd go to the Sea of Innocence and ask for the wish god's support. When he thought about it that way, Yi Zichen decided it was a good idea. Back when he'd fallen into the lower three realms and couldn't return to the god realm, Yi Zichen had helped him get back up. Looking at his face, he seemed to be a person who knew how to repay kindness. If you want to look for him, he would definitely help. It was the group of guys behind him. It seemed like they had been here for almost an entire night, right? Sir, are you looking for a room? At this moment, a waiter walked up to him with a smile on his face. He'd had his eyes on Yi Zichen for a long time. At first, he thought that Yi Zichen was a down-and-out martial artist, so he'd ignored him, but when he took a closer look, there were at least 4 spatial rings on that finger. This was definitely a noble lord. Not daring to delay any longer, the waiter hurried over. Looking at the sky, it was time to find a place to stay. Coincidentally, there was a waiter who was in a hurry to find him to stay in the inn, so he decided to go. Young man, you have good eyes. You can actually tell that I'm going to stay here. Yi Zichen patted his butt and stood up, then gave the waiter a meaningful glance. Let's go back to your place to take a look. Oh, right. What's the name of your inn? After working as a waiter in Raging Flame City for so long, the waiter was a shrewd man. When he saw Yi Zichen give him a meaningful glance, then glance behind him, whether intentionally or not, the waiter knew that someone was following him. However, from the looks of it, Yi Zichen wasn't afraid of his pursuers at all. The inn's motto was that customers were God. Since Yi Zichen wanted his pursuers to find him, the waiter didn't hesitate. He stretched his neck and shouted, 100 Daybreaks Inn. The 100 Daybreaks Inn. Our inn has been in Flame City for a long time. We're the best in the eastern part of the city, said Jianshun. After shouting, the waiter glanced furtively behind him, then turned to Yi Zichen. Sir, how was it? You did well. Here's your reward. Yi Zichen pulled out a bag of spirit coins and tossed it to the waiter. The waiter counted it over. There were at least 100 spirit coins in there. This was absolutely for a noble lord. When he thought of this, the waiter's delight grew even more obvious, and he shouted even louder. Sir, please come to the 100 Daybreaks Inn. The waiter carefully led Yi Zichen into the inn. As soon as they entered, several masked, black-clothed figures appeared on either side of the street. The target is staying at the 100 Daybreaks Inn. You guys go back and report. I'll keep an eye on him. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding black-clothed people disappeared into the night. The remaining black-clothed person changed his position and stared at the surroundings of the 100 Daybreak Inn. Yi Zichen originally thought that the inn wouldn't have particularly good business, but when he followed the waiter inside, he froze. The place was a hubbub of voices. The first floor of the inn was practically packed. It was hard to find an empty seat at first glance. Business seems pretty good here. Why are you still out looking for work? Sir, look at what you're saying. How can this little one say that I'm going out to pull work? That's because the heavens have given me instructions to look for you. You're of noble status, so how could you spend the night out in the open? The waiter inadvertently flattered him. Yi Zichen naturally noticed this kind of blatant flattery, but he enjoyed it very much. He nodded in satisfaction, then took a few 100 spirit coins from his spatial ring and tossed them to the waiter. Not bad. You have a bright future. Yi Zichen patted the waiter on the shoulder in satisfaction. When the waiter saw this, he'd earned a few 100 spirit coins just by saying a few words of praise. This man was too generous. Sir, please sit here for a moment. It seems you like drinking, so I'll go get you our signature immortal brew. How much is it? Hey, sir, aren't you just slapping me in the face? I'll pay for it. I just hope you're satisfied. With that, the waiter led Yi Zichen to a private room, then ran to the back to get him some wine. This fellow knows how to make trouble. Yi Zichen chuckled and shook his head. His gaze landed on the diner's tables. It was strange. From the moment he'd arrived, he noticed that these diners didn't seem to be here to eat. From start to finish, he'd never seen anyone touch their chopsticks. Moreover, people kept coming in from outside and walking straight to each table. But judging from their expressions, it didn't seem like the food was cooked. Moreover, the people who came in later would give money to the tables. It seemed like they were conducting some kind of transaction. Even though this was a business district, it was strange enough that so many people had come to the inn this late at night. Now, they'd all ordered food, but hadn't eaten, and were even making a transaction. This inn, just as Ezekiel was pondering the inn's true nature, someone suddenly appeared across from him. Chapter 1061. Amwen Chu Xing, the person sitting across from Ezekiel, looked to be in his early 20s. He was short and short, as if he hadn't gone through puberty. His cheekbones were prominent, and he was covered in freckles. His beady eyes darted around furtively. Ezekiel didn't feel much aversion to this uninvited young man. In fact, he was rather interested in what he'd just said. Information? That's right, sir. We, the Bai Shaosheng, know the heavens above and the earth below. We're proficient in the art of divination, the 5 elements, and the 8 trigrams. If you want to know anything, there's nothing I, the Bai Shaosheng, don't know. The youth spoke confidently, but when paired with his shifty-eyed demeanor, it was hard to trust him. Sanmatsi, you've come to our store to swindle people again. At that moment, the waiter who'd gone to the wine cellar hurried back. When he saw the youth, he immediately scolded the waiter, then put the flagon on the table and turned to Ezekiel. Sir, you mustn't let him fool you. This Sanmatsi is a notorious scoundrel on this street. He swindles people every day and pretends to be a con man to earn his living. If you really want to buy information, I'll recommend Grandmaster E over there. He's truly proficient in divination. Most of the information he peddles is true. Tisich, what does that old guy know about divination? He just has a few subordinates gather all sorts of news in Raging Flame City every day. When someone asks, he'll answer. If he doesn't, he'll just say something along the lines of heavenly secrets can't be divulged. If heavenly secrets really can't be divulged, I'd have been struck by lightning 80 times over a long time ago. The youth spat viciously, clearly disdainful of the waiter's reverence for Grandmaster E. That's still better than spouting nonsense. The waiter glared viciously at the youth, then reached out to grab him by the collar. Hurry up and scram. Don't try to swindle people in our store. It was one thing in the past, but the person sitting here isn't someone you can afford to offend. Although the waiter wasn't particularly well built compared to the youth, he was clearly much more muscular. The waiter grabbed him by the collar, but the youth immediately reached out and shoved him away. A gentleman uses his mouth, not his fists. Let me tell you, I'm the reincarnation of the Emperor Star of the 9 heavens. You still dare to spout nonsense here. As he spoke, the waiter raised his fist to punch Ezekiel, but Ezekiel stopped him. Sir, the waiter did not understand. He took out a bag of spirit coins from his ring and threw it on the table. The dong sound almost made the young man's eyes pop out. That would cost at least 500 spirit coins. The young man muttered to himself. Ezekiel pointed at the money on the table and said to the waiter, Give me a few side dishes and I'll give you the rest. All right. The shop assistant happily put the bag of coins in his hand. This young master really did not look for him in vain. In just one night, he had earned almost 1,000 spirit coins just from the tips. The waiter pocketed the money and frowned at the pockmark-faced youth. Grandpa, this brat, let him stay. I'm a bit interested in what he just said. Ezekiel smiled. Did you hear that? This lord said that he's interested in me. I have to say that this lord has a discerning eye and can see that I'm not ordinary. You servants are destined to be servants for the rest of your lives, but I'm destined to roam the 9 heavens. After receiving Ezekiel's affirmation, the youth's nose rose to the sky and he snorted. What are you spacing out for? Hurry up and prepare some food and wine. The waiter's expression froze. After accepting so much money from Ezekiel, he truly didn't want this lord to fall for his tricks, so he couldn't help but remind him. Then you must be careful, sir. Pockmarked San has many tricks up his sleeve. His ability to deceive people is top-notch. Ezekiel accepted the waiter's good intentions and told him to prepare some food and wine. After the waiter left, he smiled at the pockmark-faced youth. "Let me reintroduce myself, Yi Zichen, by Xiaosheng." The youth's expression was rather arrogant. If he had a fan, he really would look like an otherworldly expert. "All right, by Xiaosheng. That's a pretty good name." Yi Zichen smiled. "Humph, this lord can tell that you're no ordinary person. You're not the same type of person as those common folk. Tell me, what information do you want to know? I'll tell you everything I know without holding anything back. However, we have to abide by the rules. Once I give you information, you can't sell it to anyone else. Furthermore, all information I sell is clearly priced." After hearing the self-proclaimed by Xiaosheng's explanation, Yi Zichen more or less understood. To put it bluntly, the 100 Daybreaks Inn was a place for peddling information. Practically every table had a peddler, and the people who came in from the outside were all peddlers. As for the peddlers, it seemed they were cooperating with the inn as well. They gave a portion of the money they earned from selling information to the inn. Yi Zichen smiled faintly at Bai Xiaosheng. "Just now, you said you're the Emperor Star's auxiliary star. Which star are you?" Bai Xiaosheng said nothing. Instead, he glanced at the immortal brew the waiter had brought him. Yi Zichen instantly understood and pushed the gourd over. "Not bad." As if satisfied with Yi Zichen's performance, he picked up the gourd. Instantly, his otherworldly demeanor vanished. He put his mouth to the gourd's mouth and poured the wine into his mouth. "Utter do fine wine. I haven't had it in years." Bai Xiaosheng gulped down the immortal brew in a few mouthfuls. His face flushed slightly, then he wiped his mouth and belched. "You're asking which star I'm?" Yi Zichen smiled and nodded. He'd stopped the waiter because he wanted to tell Bai Xiaosheng he was an auxiliary star. After all, Yi Zichen was the Emperor's star. If someone called themselves the Emperor Star's auxiliary star, he would naturally take notice. "Since you're so sensible, I'll tell you in secret. However, you mustn't tell anyone else. Otherwise, you'll get yourself killed. Go ahead. I'm actually one of the 4 auxiliary stars who assist the Emperor Star in ascending the throne, the literati star." After saying that, Bai Xiaosheng's face was filled with pride. Wen Chuxing was definitely the most proficient in divination among the 4 great auxiliary stars. As long as this rich, silly old hat believed him, then he would be able to raise the price when he asked questions later and earn a lot of money. In truth, Bai Xiaosheng had been eyeing Yi Zichen for a long time. From a moment Yi Zichen tipped him without saying a word, Bai Xiaosheng was certain he was rich but brainless. His reputation in Raging Flame City was growing by the day. Everyone knew he was a swindler. It would be hard for him to earn enough money to eat. Yi Zichen looked unfamiliar, and he was rich. When the waiter came to ruin his plans, he couldn't sit still any longer. But this foolish, rich old man had chased the waiter away. Didn't that mean his good days had come? "You say you're the literati star?" Yi Zichen only smiled calmly. His expression betrayed no hint of what he was thinking. Bai Xiaosheng didn't know why, but when he saw that smile, his heart lurched. However, he braced himself and said, "That's right. I'm the literati star." "What? You don't believe me? Look at your expression." "What? You want to say you know the literati star?" "I'm sorry, but I don't think I know you." Chapter 1062. Auxiliary Star Yi Zichen's casual tone frightened Bai Xiaosheng so much that his heart trembled. However, he'd been a swindler for so long. If he didn't have this much subtlety, how was he supposed to make a living? "You know the literati star? That's the funniest joke I've ever heard." Bai Xiaosheng laughed maniacally. He wanted to use his laughter to cover up his unease and test the truth of Yi Zichen's words. However, what shocked him the most was that Yi Zichen's smile remained indifferent the entire time. "No way. Do you really know him?" Bai Xiaosheng couldn't help but mutter to himself. Then he gnashed his teeth, his beady eyes darting back and forth. "Was what you said just now true?" "What? You're not going to say you're the literati star anymore?" Yi Zichen laughed genially. His calm demeanor made Bai Xiaosheng feel even more unsure. What kind of luck was this? He'd actually run into someone who knew the literati star. Didn't that mean this guy was actually one of the 9 heavenly stars? "Huh, I'm feeling a bit unwell. I'll help you solve your problem next time." With that, Bai Xiaosheng leapt out of the private room like a monkey. When the surrounding guests saw this, they all looked at him with disgust. Bai Xiaosheng was infamous in Raging Flame City. It seemed he'd been caught scamming people again and was now trying to escape. Although they were disgusted, no one tried to stop him. It wasn't that they didn't want to get involved in other people's business. It was just that although Bai Shaoxing wasn't strong, his fleeing skills had reached the point of perfection. He'd once tricked a human immortal expert who'd tried to catch him but failed. Most of them had only just entered immortality. Catching Bai Shaoxing was even more impossible. All of a sudden, they looked at Yi Zichen, their gazes filled with pity. Did I say you could run? At that moment, Yi Zichen, who was sitting on a chair, spoke up, then hooked his finger at Bai Shaoxing. Bai Shaoxing had already run to the inn's entrance, but he couldn't stop himself from falling back. An expert. The people at the other tables couldn't help but murmur. They couldn't tell how strong this expert was. To be able to capture Bai Shaoxing, who even a human immortal couldn't deal with, effortlessly, he must be at least a heaven immortal expert. This sort of expert was rare in Raging Flame City. When they realized that Yi Zichen might be a sky immortal, some were already itching to try and see if they could become his followers. Bang! He returned to his seat the same way he ran out. When he saw that they'd returned to Yi Zichen's private seat, Bai Shaoxing's expression instantly darkened. Lord, I was wrong. Yi Zichen merely smiled at him and pursed his lips. Tell me, what star are you? Although the story of the Emperor's Star and the Auxiliary Star had been passed down in the God Clan, very few people knew about it after so many years. Bai Shaoxing could name the Emperor's Star and the Auxiliary Stars, and he could even mention one of the 4 great auxiliary stars, the Literati Star. Either he had really done his homework, or he really was one of the auxiliary stars. If it was the former, then so be it. But if it was the latter, then Yi Zichen couldn't let him escape no matter what. Bai Shaoxing's expression was as bitter as a melon. He looked helplessly at Yi Zichen, who was smiling calmly at him. Grandpa, you're also one of the 9 heavenly stars, right? I am indeed the Emperor's Star's auxiliary star. However, I am not one of the 4 great auxiliary stars. Instead, I am the auxiliary star that assists the left auxiliary star. A few years ago, a star suddenly fell on my body and told me that it was a lucky star. At first, I was confused, so I went to look up the history of the Emperor's Star's auxiliary stars. The assistant star who assisted the assistant star of the left was the most important. Lord, you understand, it means that one's life will be filled with riches and honor. I thought it was a joyful fart, but I didn't expect to become poorer and poorer. In the end, I couldn't even afford to eat, so I had to resort to scamming people to make a living. In order to gain Yi Zichen's trust, he even revealed his left arm. There really was a star brand on his left forearm. Not bad. When Yi Zichen saw the stars on her arm, he smiled in satisfaction. He hadn't expected this kid to be Yinshang's auxiliary star. He just didn't know which divine mountain Yinshang resided on. Grandpa, your food is here. The waiter brought the dishes over. The entire table was filled with the inn's signature dishes. As he left, he shot Bai Shaoxing a warning glare. When he saw that, Bai Shaoxing couldn't help but smile wryly. Right now, it wasn't a matter of whether or not he was a scammer. It was a matter of whether or not he could keep his life. He carefully studied Yi Zichen's expression, then heard, Eat, huh? Bai Shaoxing was clearly taken aback. I ordered this for you. Once you've eaten, you can follow me from now on. Didn't you say you were the assistant star's lord? Not bad. Your life of riches and honor has arrived. Really? Of course. Hurry up and eat. The food's going to get cold. In truth, the assistant star's fate was to wholeheartedly assist the assistant star of the left. When he descended, he'd received the same instruction. However, he'd bitterly waited several years for the assistant star of the left. In fact, he'd almost starved to death. He snorted coldly in his heart. Why wait for the assistant star of the left? I'd rather be his lackey than be his lackey. As he considered this, Bai Shaoxing couldn't help but curse inwardly. Who cares if he's the assistant star or the assistant star of the left? I'm done. In the axe gang's front hall, 2 enormous axes were carved into the wall, crisscrossed. There was a chair below, and the back of the chair was also engraved with the same axe as the one on the wall, and there was a burly man sitting on the chair. I called you all here because I have something to discuss with you. The man on the chair was the Axe Gang's Raging Flame City branch leader, Huang Aogu, Zhao Yi, and the other captains of the Axe Gang sat in the hall. Just a few days ago, our branches Zhao Yi, Captain Zhao, and Scar were robbed. Do you know about this? When Zhao Yi heard this, his expression was incomparably unsightly. He'd spent his entire life robbing people, only to have them stolen from him. To him, this was an unforgettable humiliation. The other captains nodded. Zhao Yi's matter had caused quite a ruckus. They all knew about it. Chapter 1063. Scarface was going to betray them. The gang leader was personally leading the team. Who would dare refuse? Even if they wanted to refuse, the gang leader's tyrannical power forced them to brace themselves and agree. Gang leader. Just as the other captains expressed their willingness to follow, one of them frowned. Earlier, we received news that bastard is with the Skyspan Association. If we just charge him like this, won't we incur their enmity? Huang Aogu smiled and waved his hand dismissively in response to these concerns. The scouts I sent have already reported that Yi has already left the Skyspan Trading Company. He's currently staying at the 100 Daybreaks Inn. Even so, we can't do anything inside the city. No one knows for sure what his relationship with the Skyspan Trading Company is. If we want to be absolutely safe, we'd best take him outside the city. For a moment, the captains all revealed awkward expressions. Zhao Yi's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Seeing that everyone was silent, Scarface, who was sitting at the end of the table, rolled his eyes a few times. As soon as Huang Aogu called them over, he'd known they were here for Yi Zichen. After being robbed twice, Scarface had long since learned his lesson. He didn't want to provoke Yi Zichen. As a result, he didn't express any opinions during the entire meeting. Even when everyone was vying to get revenge, he merely smiled calmly and nodded. His heart was filled with disdain. They'd never witnessed Yi Zichen's terror. If they went alone, they'd most likely be robbed. Division leader. After mulling it over for a moment, Scarface cupped his fists and rose to his feet. Scarface, what is it? In this meeting, Scarface's position was the lowest among the group. Huang Aogu was astonished that he'd stand up at a time like this. He looked over. This subordinate. Scarface wanted to say something, but stopped. His expression was filled with sincerity and unwillingness. His entire face seemed twisted with rage. This subordinate request for the order to lure the Yi bastard out of the city. That bastard has robbed me twice. This is an absolute insult and trampling on my dignity and character. These past few days, I haven't been able to sleep at night. I've been thinking about revenge all the time. Since branch leader and my colleagues don't know how to trick him out of the city, then let me do it. This subordinate has been in the Axe Gang for several years, but I haven't done anything great for the gang. Leader, please give this subordinate a chance. He lowered his head deeply, and his sincere tone seemed to move everyone in the hall. Huang Aogu's face lit up with delight. Everything was ready. All they needed to do was wait for Yi Zichen to leave Raging Flame City. However, no one could guarantee when he would leave the city. Madame Wu was still urging him to leave. Now that Scarface had taken the initiative to ask for permission, this naturally couldn't be better. Are you fully confident? Although Scarface's initiative made him very satisfied, they only had one chance to act. If Scarface hadn't lured Yi Zichen out of the city, he would have been on his guard. This subordinate is willing to guarantee with my head that I will definitely lure that bastard out of the city. If you fail, bring your head to see me. It could be said that Scarface vividly displayed the emotions of hatred clouding his heart. He cupped his fists and spoke with a pleading tone. Leader, please give this subordinate this chance. All right, I'll give you this chance. However, you must understand that we only have one chance. If we alert him, the consequences will be unimaginable. However, if you succeed, I'll promote you to senior captain. After a moment's hesitation, Huang Aogu patted his armrest and nodded in agreement. I won't let you down. Scarface solemnly cupped his fists at Huang Aogu and the other captains, then resolutely turned around and walked out of the main hall. Looking at his back, he looked like a hero. The other captains couldn't help but be visibly moved. They wondered just what had happened in the past for Scarface to hate Yi Zichen so deeply. Huang Aogu nodded in satisfaction. Although he was worried about whether or not Scarface could succeed, his firm conviction made him willing to trust him just this once. When Scarface returns, it'll be the anniversary of Yi Zichen's death. Scarface took heavy steps, his expression cold as he left the Axe Gang's main hall. As soon as he stepped out of the main hall, Scarface's gaze shifted. He leaned against the wall and panted heavily. His words and expression just now had come from the bottom of his heart. However, he just used his emotions to put on an act with the Axe Gang. Was he really going to lure Yi Zichen out of the city and cause trouble for him? No way. After Yi Zichen robbed him a second time, Scarface decided not to provoke this malefic star ever again. If he had the chance, he'd stick with him. The way he saw it, hanging out with Yi Zichen was far better than being a member of the Axe Gang. However, asking to be Yi Zichen's lackey for no reason was too abrupt. He needed to prove his loyalty. Now that the Axe Gang was plotting to cause trouble for Yi Zichen, he needed to prove his loyalty. The only thing he regretted was losing his position as a senior captain. He'd been with the Axe Gang for so long. Hadn't he waited for this day? Goodbye, senior captain. Forgetting the towering and ferocious Axe Gang behind him, the Scarface man's face instantly changed and was filled with joy. My Scarface's new life is about to begin. No matter where you went, the power of money couldn't be underestimated. Yi Zichen's generosity won over the 100 daybreaks in attendance, and they happily busied themselves for him. Sir, this is our hotel's reserved guest room. I saw that only this room suits your temperament, so I specially gave it to you. The attendant pushed open the door to the guest room, then looked around at the decor. He exuded the aura of a nouveau riche. That's the price of this room. To me, money is nothing but a number. Yi Zichen looked around at the room's gilded decorations. In truth, he wasn't particularly satisfied. But when he heard the attendant doubt his spending power, how could he tolerate that? Whoosh! He took 10,000 spirit coins from his spatial ring. When he saw the small mountain of coins on the floor, the attendant's eyes went wide. Bai Xiaosheng reacted the same way. After a brief daze, he was even more determined to become Yi Zichen's henchman. Minister of the left, go die. Deduct the cost of your room from these 10,000 spirit coins. If it's not enough, just tell me. With that, Yi Zichen took another 100 spirit coins from his spatial ring and tossed them onto the pile. This is your reward. He'd thought the 10,000 spirit coins would be a reward after deducting the room's cost. He hadn't expected this. The attendant was somewhat disappointed, but he inwardly warned himself not to be too greedy. 100 spirit coins was already quite good. Sir, I hope you enjoy your stay. Yi Zichen gathered up the spirit coins and left the room. Then, he and Bai Xiaosheng entered the room. Yi Zichen hadn't seen it from the entrance, but after entering, his eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. This place was too rich. Just by standing there and breathing in the air, it was as if he could smell the scent of money. Yi Zichen, on the other hand, was much better off. After all, he'd seen much of the world. If he was frightened by this room, Your Excellency, you can't take this gold away, can you? Your Excellency, why did you go and take that piece of gold again? Your Excellency, Bai Xiaosheng smiled wryly as he watched Yi Zichen take the gold. After a long while, when he saw that the gold couldn't be taken away, Yi Zichen gnashed his teeth in hatred. However, he maintained his inscrutable expression and said, I just wanted to see if their decorations were sturdy or not. I'm just trying to see if the decorations here are sturdy or not. It looks pretty good. You're right, Bai Xiaosheng smiled wryly, but inwardly he muttered to himself. Yi Zichen's actions just now seemed to have damaged his image. In order to salvage his image, Yi Zichen couldn't help but put on a serious expression. He sat cross-legged on a chair and stared straight at him. Chapter 1064. Do you think you're the only one who knows how to divine fate? When Yi Zichen put away his money-grubbing expression and put on a serious one, Bai Xiaosheng sensed the atmosphere in the guest room change completely. The heavy pressure made him gulp involuntarily. He obediently placed his hands on his abdomen, lowered his head, and waited for Yi Zichen to speak. Aha, look at you. Suddenly, Yi Zichen burst into laughter. The gloomy atmosphere in the room was also swept away. Then, with a relaxed expression on his face, he crossed his legs and chuckled. I remember you looking down on Grandmaster. The shop assistant worships so much. Tell me the truth. You know how to divine fate, don't you? Tell me the truth. I can see it all. Yi Zichen's sharp gaze pierced through by Xiaoxing's soul. He had no secrets to hide from Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen's methods made his heart tremble. Every single one of them had a star protecting their soul. In the past, he'd encountered experts who'd tried to pry into his soul, but they'd all been blocked by his protective star. Yet Yi Zichen had effortlessly broken through his star's defenses and interrogated his soul. That Grandmaster, he merely cooperates with the 100 Daybreaks in. He's a Grandmaster they've created. As for whether or not he's truly capable, I'm sure he's at least somewhat capable. However, he's not as mysterious as the people at the inn say. Bai Xiaoxing didn't dare lie. He rubbed his hands. It's just as you think, Your Excellency. As an assistant star, I do know a few methods of divination. However, my strength is shallow, and my divination abilities are limited. Bai Xiaoxing wasn't lying about this. Divination required sufficient strength. If he wanted to truly understand the heavens, the earth, and the heavens, he'd have to ascend to the divine mountains to do so. Even if he had a star, he'd only be able to see the slightest bit of starlight. Afraid Yi Zichen wouldn't believe him, Bai Xiaoxing simply closed his eyes. Gradually, his body began to glow faintly. This glow was the light of the 9 heavens. After a while, he opened his eyes. They were imprinted with the mark of a star. In half the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, someone will come looking for you. Looking for me? Yi Zichen couldn't help but arch his brows. He didn't know anyone in Raging Flame City. Woody didn't know where he was staying, so who could come looking for him? The newcomer has 2 small axes in front of his chest. What I said is true and false. Bai Xiaoxing, who was using the astrolabe to deduce, was startled for a moment. The starlight in his eyes and around his body also dispersed. Sir, how did you know? Could it be that you also... Hey, it's just divination. It's just child's play for me. Do you think you're the only one who knows how to do it? Yi Zichen waved his hand in disdain, then pretended to be an otherworldly expert and smiled. However, he thought to himself that he was right. When he entered the inn, he felt that someone was following him. At that time, he suspected that it was the Axe Gang. Therefore, he made a random guess. Who would have thought that he actually guessed correctly? However, they seemed to have come in too much of a hurry. From Yi Zichen's point of view, they should have waited a few days before causing trouble for him. However, his wild guesses sent waves of shock through Bai Xiaoxing's heart. If he wanted to deduce, he needed the astrolabe and enough time, but all he could see was a blurry scene. Yi Zichen could actually predict the future with a wave of his hand. This sort of ability was no different from knowing the heavens and fate. Instantly, Yi Zichen's weight in Bai Xiaoxing's heart increased. He was even more determined to stick by his side. When he saw Bai Xiaoxing's expression change, Yi Zichen knew that his unfathomable abilities had frightened the kid. He didn't point it out. Instead, he smiled calmly and said, "Do you know what the newcomer looks like? This. Forgive me for my incompetence, but the images projected by the astrolabe were too blurry. I wasn't able to see the newcomer's face clearly. However, I do know that he's already here." As soon as he finished speaking, there was an urgent knock on Yi Zichen's window. "Is Senior Yi inside?" The voice outside was respectful and friendly, but seemed to be a bit strained. Yi Zichen was stunned despite himself. Since when had the Axe Gang become so friendly? Although they were adorable children of wealth, their tone was quite aggressive. As he pondered this, Yi Zichen gestured for Bai Xiaoxing to open the window. When he opened the window, he didn't see anyone, only a pair of hands. Bai Xiaoxing looked down and saw a man with a scar on his face scamper up the stairs. F***CK off. Bang! He pushed Scarface, who was climbing up, down. Not long after, Scarface's miserable screams could be heard from below. After pushing him down, Bai Xiaoxing patted his chest and said with some lingering fear, "You scare me to death. Bro, shouldn't you be worried about whether the person you pushed down is still alive? We're on the 5th floor." Yi Zichen helped Scarface up the stairs. He had to admit that Scarface's skin was really thick. Even after falling from the 5th floor, his arms and legs weren't broken. Only his butt hurt, and his gait wasn't quite right. Yizichin sat on a chair and watched Scarface, who didn't even dare sit. He rubbed his butt and grimaced in pain. Every now and then, he would glare at Bai Xiaosheng. Yizichin felt a bit of pity for him. You're lucky you didn't die even after falling like that. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Are you here to give me money again? Bro, even if you want to help the poor, you should find someone else. You're always helping me. I'm starting to feel a bit embarrassed. Help the poor. When he heard this, Scarface's face twitched. The scar on his face wriggled like an earthworm. He didn't know if it was because his butt hurt or because Yizichin's words had provoked him. In the blink of an eye, his face turned incomparably gloomy. Brat, don't talk trash to me. I'm here to challenge you. Do you dare fight me outside Raging Flame City? Yizichin was a bit dumbfounded. Could it be that after robbing Scarface twice, he'd become mentally retarded? From the looks of it, he was here to challenge him? Are you sure? He could only say he'd lost his mind. Even Zhao Yi, who'd entered immortality, had been subdued by him. Scarface hadn't even entered immortality, yet he wanted to challenge him. Was he tired of living? Do you dare not? Scarface was still as troublesome as ever. He glared at Yizichin like a bully. He'd actually come for revenge. Bai Xiaosheng couldn't help but frown. He'd only just caught up to this big shot, and before he'd even enjoyed his riches, he'd run into an enemy. Judging from his clothes, he seemed to be a member of the Axe Gang. He'd fought his way through Raging Flame City for so long. The Axe Gang's fearsome reputation resounded like thunder in his ears. Although he was confident in Yizichin, the Axe Gang was just too famous. He couldn't help but worry. So vicious. Yizichin was also frightened by Scarface's aura. Just as he was about to say something, he realized that Scarface was winking at him. Bai Xiaosheng closed the window. Bai Xiaosheng obediently went to close the window, but inwardly, he was wondering if they were going to fight. If they really did fight, should he help? As he hesitated, the window closed. At the same time, Yizichin placed a seal around the room, then frowned at Scarface. What do you want to say this time? Say it. Scarface, who'd been acting like a fiend just a moment ago, knelt to the ground with a thud. Chapter 1065. Give this lowly one a chance to renounce darkness for the light. Scarface knelt on the ground with a sullen expression. Just a second ago, he'd looked fierce and ferocious, as if he wanted to fight to the death. In the next second, he'd knelt and begged for mercy, saying he'd pay up. Bai Xiaosheng felt like his brain wasn't good enough. He looked at Scarface in bewilderment. Sir, I know I've offended you before. It's all this lowly one's fault. But you didn't lose anything, and you even stole quite a bit of money from me and Zhao Yi. Bang! Yizichin slammed his hand down on the chair, startling Scarface so much he almost bit his tongue. On the way here, he thought up quite a few excuses. That one slap scared him to death. Sir, Scarface's voice trembled, and his legs trembled uncontrollably as he knelt on the ground. He hadn't said anything wrong just now. How had he angered this lord? What did you just say? Steal? When did I ever steal your money? Yizichin's expression was unsightly. Mentioning steal was an insult to his character. He was a law-abiding citizen. How could he steal someone else's money? This Scarface was simply too vicious. He actually wanted to splash dirty water on his character. Didn't you give me that money out of respect? How dare you say I stole it? A gentleman loves money, but he takes it in a proper way. I'm a dignified, 7-foot-tall man, filled with righteousness. How could I steal someone else's money? Scarface, you'd better watch your words. So this was where the problem came from. Scarface cursed himself inwardly for his carelessness, then hurriedly nodded in agreement. Sir, you're right. Those treasures were our way of showing respect to you. Yizichin's expression relaxed slightly. He leaned back in his chair, his eyelids drooping, and looked at Scarface kneeling on the ground. Then what did you mean when you said you wanted to fight me one-on-one? When he heard that, Scarface's mocking smile was instantly replaced by resentment. Sir, you might not know this, but the Axe Gang is plotting against you. Just now, they had a meeting and said that you stole Zhao Ye's treasure and that they wanted to take revenge on you. When I heard that, I got angry. You're such a righteous person. How did you end up as an unpardonable villain in their mouths? As a matter of fact, I asked that grandson Huang Aogu for permission to lure you out of the city. But in reality, I came to give you a message. How dare you? Yi Zichen, his expression calm, instantly slammed the table and roared. His sudden shout startled both by Xiaosheng and Scarface. They actually came to me for revenge. It's good enough that I didn't cause trouble for them. Scarface nodded angrily when he heard this. They shared a common enemy. That's right. Otherwise, this lowly one wouldn't be so angry. As for what happened just now, that was just a temporary measure. You may not know this, but you actually have a lot of... He's an informer of the Axe Gang. Yi Zichen smiled nonchalantly. That little bit of concealment is nothing in front of me. You're right, sir. Scarface smiled apologetically and nodded. Scarface's intentions were clear. He was clearly a member of the Axe Gang, yet he referred to the others as they. He was obviously trying to exclude Yi Zichen. The Axe Gang wanted to harm Yi Zichen, yet he'd come to give them a warning. This was no different from betraying the gang. He'd rushed here in the middle of the night, apologized and flattered. If Yi Zichen couldn't guess what was going on, he'd be an idiot. However, he couldn't say it himself. Scarface had to take the initiative. Hey, aren't you a member of the Axe Gang? And a squad leader at that. You came all the way here to give me a warning? That's a bit unreasonable, isn't it? Yi Zichen deliberately pointed out the problem. The kneeling Scarface's eyes lit up. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Kneeling on the ground, he straightened his chest. His face was filled with determination and righteousness, and he waved his hand. Sir, in truth, I've already decided to leave the Axe Gang. Oh, Yi Zichen arched his brows. You actually want to leave the Axe Gang? Don't you know how many people want to join the Axe Gang, but can't? You're actually saying you want to leave? If I hadn't run into you, I might have been a bit smug about becoming a member of the Axe Gang, especially a squad leader. But after your 2 lessons, I came to a sudden realization. The Axe Gang is an evil, heartless, and unjust gang. It's not a place I should serve. Scarface's expression was sincere, but his tone revealed his disdain for the Axe Gang. I never would have guessed that my unintentional actions would help you, someone who'd strayed from the right path, come to your senses. As the Buddha says, the sea of bitterness knows no bounds. Repent, and you'll be saved. If you want to turn back now, it's not too late. Yi Zichen smiled calmly in affirmation of Scarface's words. He was the embodiment of justice. He tapped the table and snorted. I've long since investigated the Axe Gang. On the surface, they say they're a righteous sect, but in reality, they're just a bunch of bandits. Their existence is like a malignant tumor to raging Flame City. I was just about to take care of them, but I never would have guessed that you'd be so self-aware. You've dodged a calamity. Yi Zichen's indifferent tone made it seem as if he could annihilate the entire Axe Gang with a snap of his fingers. When Scarface heard this, his heart trembled. He had no doubt about Yi Zichen's big talk. Fortunately, he hadn't persisted in going about things the wrong way. If he'd continued to oppose Yi Zichen, he might have lost his life. He felt more and more confident that he was far too wise and farsighted. Those people who'd been yelling about making trouble for Yi Zichen would probably cry their eyes out. However, why hadn't Yi Zichen said anything about recruiting him? Just now, he made it clear that he wanted to leave the Axe Gang. That meant he wanted to join Yi Zichen's team. Scarface licked his lips, raised his head, and cupped his fists sincerely. Sir, this humble one has a presumptuous request. Speak. Please, sir, give this humble one a chance to forsake the dark and seek the light. I want to follow you. It was your boundless righteousness that helped me realize my mistakes and come to my senses. You're like the brightest star in the sky, guiding me onto the right path. The way I see it, only by following you will I have a bright future. Although we've had our differences in the past, given your moral integrity, I doubt you'll stoop to my level. Please give this humble one a chance. Let me join you. Scarface had no self-restraint to begin with. He was an uncouth fellow. Otherwise, he wouldn't have joined a place like the Axe Gang. In order to say what he just said, he'd racked his brains and used every word he could think of. He didn't know if his true feelings would move Yi Zichen. After saying all that, he buried his head in the ground. You want to follow me? Yi Zichen laughed playfully, but then his expression changed and he snorted. Chapter 1066. 7 days later, they met outside Raging Flame City. Yi Zichen sat in his chair and stared intently at Scarface, who prostrated himself on the ground. A tyrannical aura radiated from him, as if he were a god descending to the mortal world. You know there's a rift between us. Since that's the case, how can I trust you when you say you want to join me? Yi Zichen's eyes flashed. As he spoke, it was as if the laws of heaven and earth trembled in response. The 5 elements in the not-so-spacious room were thrown into chaos. Thunderous booms echoed in Scarface's ears. Bai Shaoxing stood to the side, so shocked he couldn't make a sound. He'd once thought Yi Zichen was strong, but he never would have guessed it would be like this. Scarface, who was prostrating on the ground, was even more shaken. The rumbling in his ears was like a giant hammer pounding on his soul. By now, Yi Zichen was thoroughly enraged. No matter how sincere Scarface's words were, Yi Zichen could sense that he wasn't sincere about joining him. He was worried about his own life. He didn't dare bet everything he had on Yi Zichen. He wasn't just curious. He'd just entered the god realm and had no faction backing him, nor did he know anyone capable of backing him up. He seemed carefree and easy, but in truth, every step he took was difficult. He was treading on thin ice. There was no way he'd expose his back to a two-faced man. All Yi Zichen had to do now was make him choose. If he truly submitted wholeheartedly, Yi Zichen would nurture him as a confidant. Otherwise, he could simply let him go and have the Axe Gang deal with him with all their might. To him, the puny Axe Gang wasn't a threat at all. A bead of sweat rolled down Scarface's chin and fell to the floor. In just a few breaths of time, his entire body was drenched in cold sweat. This shouldn't be the case. He'd already done everything in his power to put on an act. There shouldn't have been any slip-ups. Yi Zichen was clearly enraged. His life or death could be decided with a single thought. He didn't want to die. His heart was filled with stubbornness. He still wanted to return to his clan when he truly made a name for himself. He wanted to make those who'd once looked down on him regret it. He still had a beautiful woman he hadn't married, and he still had children. My lord, in this endless fear, Scarface put away his crafty thoughts. His pupils trembled, but there was a sense of certainty. I, Weijia, swear on my soul that I am willing to submit to my lord and never betray him. His words were solemn and came from the bottom of his heart. Swearing on one's soul could be considered the most ruthless of oaths, but this oath was not purely for the sake of survival. He had indeed thought about it before. Yi Zichen's strength was far beyond his imagination. Yi Zichen's strength meant that he was the real deal. The Axe Gang had a huge background, but with his own talent, it would be very difficult for him to become a branch leader, even if he spent his entire life. He had an obsession. He wanted to return to the clan. Yi Zichen had allowed him to see this possibility, so he was willing to believe it wasn't just blindness. The world returned to peace. Yi Zichen's gaze was filled with satisfaction and admiration. This was exactly the oath he wanted. He wanted Scarface's absolute loyalty. See you outside Flame City in 7 days. With a wave of his hand, Scarface felt a gentle spiritual power lift him up from the ground. He also knew that he had truly gained Yi Zichen's trust. I'll take my leave. He cupped his fists, bowed, and left the room. Just as he was about to leave, Yi Zichen called out to him. Wait a moment. Those 2 words were like a nightmare to Scarface. His shoulders instinctively trembled, but when he remembered that he and Yi Zichen were now on the same side, he mustered his courage and turned to look at Yi Zichen. You're right. Yi Zichen smiled and said, I have an old friend with a scarred face, also surnamed Wei. You're not bad. When Scarface returned to the Axe Gang and announced their agreement in 7 days, the entire Axe Gang's branch in Raging Flame City sprang into action. If even Zhao Yi had to admit defeat, their opponent was definitely an expert at the human immortal level or higher. The other captains spent the past few days either buying high-grade treasures or going into seclusion in an attempt to increase their cultivation. Even Huang Aogu, His gaze was unusually solemn as he repeatedly wiped the profound grade immortal sword the gang leader had bestowed upon him. His gaze was sharp and fierce. In contrast, Yi Zichen had spent the past few days eating and drinking to his heart's content. During this time, he'd even used his immortal awareness to check on Wu Di's condition, where he discovered that Wu Di's mid-stage, entering immortality strength had stabilized, and he was already on the verge of reaching the peak of entering immortality. He finally relaxed. In the blink of an eye, the 7-day agreement arrived. Yellow sand swirled in the wind outside Raging Flame City. A dozen or so experts at or above entering immortality stood outside the city gates. At their head was Huang Aogu, dressed in black robes and wielding an immortal sword. He rode atop a warhorse. When the onlookers saw this, they carefully avoided the bandits, afraid that if they weren't careful, they'd anger them and rob them clean. Scarface. Huang Aogu knit his brows. Scarface, who stood at the very back of the group, smiled apologetically and approached him. "Boss, you said he'd definitely come here in 7 days. We've already waited for almost an hour, but he still hasn't shown up. Did he lie to you?" "No, he'll definitely come." Scarface's tone was resolute. Huang Aogu's expression shifted slightly. He looked him up and down, somewhat suspicious as to why he was so confident. Scarface bowed slightly, returned to his original position, then looked at the city gates with a strange expression on his face. Another half an hour passed by. He really dares come. Zhao Ye's shoulders trembled. He gnashed his teeth and looked at the city gates. When he saw his expression, Huang Aogu narrowed his eyes and looked in the same direction. Just 100 meters away from them, a man was yawning as he walked towards them. Although they were still quite a distance away, based on the man's gait and his faint aura, Zhao Ye could sense that this was their target. The newcomer was none other than Yi Zichen. Last night, he couldn't stand by Xiaoxing's pestering, so he'd followed him to a place of pleasure. Needless to say, the girls there were much better at having fun than the girls in the Modern Realms nightclubs. Yi Zichen hadn't rested a single night. Of course, don't think too much about it. It was just a game. Yi Zichen hadn't slept all night. After returning to the inn, he rested for less than 4 hours. When he remembered that the Axe Gang was still waiting for him outside the city, he had no choice but to reluctantly give up on his beloved pillow. With no other choice, he reluctantly gave up on his beloved pillow and rushed out of Flame City, huffing and puffing. Yi Zichen only stopped when he was 5 meters away from Huang Aogu. He couldn't help but yawn. However, he still used his poor acting skills and pretended to be very surprised. What's going on? With so many people here, you can already be considered a criminal organization. Who are you? Hand over your identification cards. His acting skills were far too shoddy. Anyone could see that he was putting on an act. Although Huang Aogu doubted Yi Zichen's composure, he didn't have time to think too much about it. He slashed viciously at the ground with his immortal sword. Sharp sword energy instantly carved a trench in the earth. Chapter 1067. Shameless. With a long howl, Huang Aogu unleashed all of his spiritual power. Fierce winds howled, swirling the yellow sand into a sandstorm that swept towards Yi Zichen. How unfriendly. Yi Zichen dodged in a panic, but his gaze fell upon the immortal sword in Huang Aogu's hand. Ever since he'd used the Xinyuan sword to seal the murderer, Deng Long, he'd never run into a suitable weapon again. Indeed, his reincarnation had been too poor. If not for Gu Zichen, he feared he'd starve to death. I want that sword. Yi Zichen snorted inwardly, then steadied himself. He covered his mouth and frowned. Don't you know that this is a harmonious society? What's the point of all this fighting and killing? Can't we just sit down and have a nice chat? When he heard this familiar tone, Zhao Ye's expression darkened. He clearly remembered how Yi Zichen had fooled him into thinking he was weak when he'd gone to Black Ox Town to make trouble for him. But once he'd said those words, Yi Zichen had slapped him in the face with lightning speed. Zhao Yi remembered all of this clearly. Having experienced this before, he naturally couldn't let Huang Aogu fall for it. Division leader, don't let him deceive you. That bastard pretended to be weak, then subdued me with lightning speed. The way I see it, We shouldn't waste our breath on him. Let our men attack together. Two fists are no match for four hands. No matter how strong he is, can he be stronger than all of us? If anyone else had said this, Huang Aogu might not have been happy. But Zhao Yi was one of his trusted subordinates, so he naturally had to listen. Besides, Huang Aogu wasn't particularly fond of talking big. He'd become the division leader of Raging Flame City's division leader because of his ruthless methods. Kill him. Huang Aogu didn't waste any more time. He raised his immortal sword, pointed it at Yi Zichen, and charged forward to meet him. When the division leaders saw that their division leaders had taken action, they didn't dare delay. They all charged forward. Hey, you guys. When he saw the Axe Gang attack him without so much as a word, Yi Zichen revealed a faint expression of helplessness. What he liked the most was to say a few more words before fighting. This way, not only could he improve their friendship, but would also make things less awkward when fighting later. If all of them were knocked out, how awkward would the atmosphere be? Forget it. Coincidentally, he was still feeling a little sleepy. The sooner he dealt with them, the sooner he could go back to sleep. Thinking that, Yi Zichen did not hold back anymore. Dong, dong, dong. Before they could even scream, the members of the Axe Gang felt as if they had been thrown into the sky and then fell heavily to the ground. One on top of the other, piled up into a small mountain. The last one, Huang Aogu, had specifically left Yi Zichen until the end. No matter what, he was a branch leader. He deserved the respect he deserved. He casually tossed Huang Aogu to the very top. From a distance, it looked like a miniature pyramid. Not bad, not bad. Yi Zichen nodded in satisfaction as he looked at the artwork he created. Among them, the only one Yi Zichen hadn't beaten was Scarface. He ran to his side. Master, Scarface, I can't believe you betrayed us. Huang Aogu landed at the top of the pyramid, his expression hideous. When Scarface returned, he'd sensed that something was off. However, over the past few days, everyone in the gang had been busy capturing Yi Zichen. Plus, Scarface hadn't been too lazy, so he suppressed his suspicions. Now, as he watched Scarface scamper up to Yi Zichen, he truly hated himself for not killing the traitor sooner. Pia! Yi Zichen slapped him across the face, sending Huang Aogu spinning like a spinning top atop the pyramid. When he finally stopped, his entire face was swollen. What are you yelling for? Are you trying to show off how loud your voice is? Yi Zichen arrogantly berated Huang Aogu, then clasped his hands behind his back and walked up to the crowd. What are you all piling up here for? Are you trying to use them as firewood? All of you get down and stand side by side. The 16 captains, including Huang Aogu, obediently stood in a line, hands at their sides. Lil Comrade Wei, do you know what to do next? Yi Zichen glanced at Scarface. Scarface had already been dealt with twice, so he naturally knew what to do next. At ease. Attention. Stand straight. When he saw that someone wasn't standing straight, Scarface kicked him. The captain was furious, but he didn't dare say anything. All he could do was straighten his back. In order to avoid being kicked, the other captains had no choice but to straighten their backs as well. Line up to the right. Look forward. He shouted these slogans with ease. Seeing the row of people obediently following his slogans, Scarface couldn't help but laugh out loud. In the past, these captains had always been arrogant and haughty. They'd ignored him, but now they had no choice but to obediently listen to him and let him do whatever he wanted. The captains in training couldn't say anything. They didn't feel like Scarface had betrayed them. They were just a bit angry that Scarface hadn't tried to betray them. Based on Yi Zichen's aura, he was at least a sky immortal expert. Boss, we're all done. After playing around a few times, Scarface grew bored, so he smiled and walked over. Yi Zichen glanced at the Axe Gang's captains and leaders, who stood ramrod straight. He nodded in satisfaction, then clasped his hands behind his back and walked over. You wanted to kill me? I just wanted to chat with you, and you just brought a bunch of big men and charged at me? Naughty. Yi Zichen slapped Huang Aogu on the back of the head. Huang Aogu didn't have the slightest bit of temper, so he obediently endured it without a word. Then Yi Zichen walked up to Zhao Yi. When he saw this fiend, Zhao Yi was so frightened that his legs trembled. What are you trembling for? Stand straight. His shout scared Zhao Yi so much that his legs stiffened and he stood ramrod straight. Yi Zichen reached out and slapped Zhao Yi several times on the back of the head. "I already took care of you once. Don't you remember? Shameless. Shameless." Then he walked around the other captains. When they saw him, they didn't even dare look him in the eye. "Did I offend you? You came looking for trouble with me? Do you really think I'm easy to bully? Naughty, naughty, naughty." Yi Zichen slapped every single one of the Axe Gang's captains and leaders. After that, they all behaved themselves. The members of the Axe Gang, who had once been able to do as they pleased in Flame City, didn't even dare to breathe loudly outside the sand-filled city. Perhaps because he was tired, Yi Zichen sighed, then walked over to Huang Aogu's sword. He picked it up, then turned around and pressed it against Huang Aogu's neck. Chapter 1068. Isn't this your gift to me? The sword pressed against Huang Aogu's neck, glinting with cold light. His skin prickled with pain, and his entire body stiffened. He squinted at the blade that was pressed against his neck, and his back began to sweat uncontrollably. "What do you think you're doing? I'm a leader of the Axe Gang's raging Flame City branch. If you kill me, you won't have a good ending." Huang Aogu's voice trembled. He tried to move his neck away from the blade, only to discover that if he moved, the blade would follow him, and it would press even closer. By now, blood had already begun seeping from his neck. The pain was so intense that he didn't dare move recklessly. The other captains looked nervously at Huang Aogu as well. This wasn't a situation that didn't concern them. Right now, they were in the same boat. If Huang Aogu said the wrong thing and angered this maleficent star, they'd most likely suffer as well. Yi Zichen smiled indifferently. He'd long since grown tired of hearing such empty threats. Besides, he really didn't care about the Axe Gang's headquarters at all, even if he brought out the Green Gang's backing. So what? All they'd get was a Supreme, but was he supposed to be afraid of a Supreme? To tell the truth, Yi Zichen was starting to like the 72 districts he'd ascended to. Here, he was at the top of the food chain. He could be as arrogant as he wanted, and he could beat up anyone he didn't like. This was much better than going to the Divine Mountains and randomly pulling out a Sky Supreme or Diviner Expert. He'd have no choice but to live like a coward. Can I take that as a threat? Yi Zichen glanced coldly at Huang Aogu, then pressed his sword even closer. Blood trickled down his neck. Huang Aogu was on the verge of going insane. This feeling of death at any moment caused his mental defenses to crumble. That pair of eyes were so cold that not even a hint of emotion could be seen. Under that gaze, Huang Aogu felt as if he had been plunged into a bottomless pit of ice. "What exactly do you want?" In his extreme terror, Huang Aogu practically roared. The veins on his neck and forehead bulged. However, as soon as he shouted, he regretted it. If he had just killed him, the longer one lived, the more afraid they were of death. Huang Aogu was truly afraid of dying right here. To Huang Aogu's surprise, Yi Zichen smiled and put his sword away. His entire face lit up with a refreshing, breezy smile. Then he patted Huang Aogu on the shoulder. "Of course, I just want some compensation for mental damage. Relax. I'm not a bloodthirsty person. I was just joking with you just now. Relax, relax." This sudden change in expression startled Huang Aogu and the group of captains. However, Yi Zichen's words made Huang Aogu curse him endlessly in his heart. Was it funny to joke around with him on the verge of death? He was so scared that he almost peed his pants. This joke was not funny at all. He kept cursing in his heart, but all of a sudden, he felt a cold glint looking at him. "You're speaking ill of me in your heart, aren't you?" Before his voice faded, a wisp of blood light appeared in everyone's eyes. When they came to their senses, they discovered that Huang Aogu's right arm had fallen to the ground. Blood spurted out like a fountain from where his arm had been severed. Huang Aogu clutched his arm and screamed in pain. His eyes widened as he stared fixedly at his severed arm. He was a sword cultivator, and he'd always wielded his sword with his right hand. Yi Zichen had cut off his right arm. That was no different from wasting his cultivation. The other captains fell silent out of fear. This malefic star was far too temperamental. One second, he'd been smiling and patting Huang Aogu on the shoulder, and the next, he'd cut off his arm. Judging from his decisiveness, He didn't seem like a bloodthirsty person at all. I really don't have a good temper. Actually, this arm is your punishment. Hurry up and compensate me for my mental damage so I can go back and rest. Yi Zichen pressed his blade against Huang Aogu's black robes and wiped the blood off it. At that moment, Yi Zichen yawned, looking exhausted. You're asking for? Huang Aogu, who'd lost an arm, glared at Yi Zichen, but Yi Zichen merely glanced at him coldly. Huang Aogu felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, and he sobered up. He was a blade puppet. Right now, his life was still in Yi Zichen's hands. Although he was unwilling, Huang Aogu lowered his head. I'll give you all my wealth. As he spoke, Huang Aogu took off his spatial ring. When the other captains saw this, they followed suit, even if they were reluctant to part with their wealth. But where there's life, there's hope. So long as they lived, they'd be able to reclaim their worldly possessions. Yi Zichen glanced at Scarface. Scarface immediately understood and took everyone's spatial rings. Even though he knew these treasures didn't belong to him, when he thought about how these heavy rings had once belonged to him, he couldn't help but feel excited. Next, he walked up to Zhao Yi. Earlier, Yi Zichen had robbed Zhao Yi of all his treasures. Now, it could be said that Zhao Yi was penniless. He didn't even have half a spirit coin in his pocket. What are you just standing there for? Hurry up and hand over the money. Scarface feigned ignorance and shouted angrily. Back in the Axe Gang, he'd been bullied by Zhao Yi quite a bit. Even a small favor from him cost him quite a bit of blood. What goes around comes around. Now, it was his turn to bully Zhao Yi. Wei Jie, don't go too far. Zhao Yi's face was ashen. Just a few days ago, Scarface had acted like a grandson, but now he was talking to him like that. Screw you. Scarface kicked Zhao Yi to the ground. He was venting all the anger he'd accumulated over the years in the Axe Gang on Zhao Yi. You bullied me in the gang? I was qualified to be promoted to captain long ago, but you kept holding me back. Who do you think you are, Zhao Yi? You look like an eggplant. You've fallen from grace, yet you're still throwing your weight around? The onlookers trembled in fear, but no one dared speak up for fear that Scarface would vent his anger on them. By now, Scarface had risen to the top. He climbed up Yi Zichen's tree branch. The other captains were envious. All right, Scarface, come back. Wei Jie called out to Scarface calmly, then spat viciously at Zhao Yi, then respectfully handed the ring to Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen scanned the ring with his immortal awareness. At a rough estimate, there was at least 100 million. The strongest of them was only a human immortal, yet they had so much wealth. From this, it was clear just how many adventurers the Axe Gang had exploited. As he looked at the money, Yi Zichen was even more determined to rid the world of evil. You're all filthy rich. Yi Zichen smiled calmly, put the ring away, then walked up to Huang Aogu and reached out. What's the meaning of this? We've already given you the compensation you wanted. What else do you want? Chapter 1069. Chaos. Yi Zichen didn't retract his hand. He simply held it out in front of Huang Aogu. However, they'd already given Yi Zichen their spatial rings. If he still did this, he was clearly looking for trouble. Huang Aogu, who'd already lost an arm to Yi Zichen, was already fuming. At this moment, he was instantly enraged. Brat, you've gone too far. Huang Aogu's blood aura began to seep out of his body. His eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was somewhat deranged. Gone too far. Yi Zichen was standing less than half a meter away from Huang Aogu. He suddenly laughed, but then his expression instantly darkened. Just who's the one going too far? You're the ones making trouble for me over and over again. I didn't blame you, but now you're saying I'm going too far? I'm sorry, but I'm going to bully you today. What are you going to do about it? Yi Zichen was a bit angry. He'd wanted to live peacefully in the God realm. Once his immortal spiritual energy was fully converted to divine power, he'd ascend the divine mountains and head to the Yao realm. He'd never even considered provoking others. It was the Axe Gang members who'd come knocking on his door again and again. Yi Zichen didn't seem to like it, so he slapped Huang Aogu across the face. I'm slapping you right now. What are you going to do about it? Everyone fell silent. Yi Zichen's tone was arrogant, but he was telling the truth. They really couldn't do anything to him. Ugh! Huang Aogu spat out a mouthful of broken teeth and blood. He didn't want to live any longer. If you got the guts, kill us all right now. So long as you let even one of us go, we'll definitely report this to our headquarters. Let me tell you, our boss is a sky immortal expert, and there's more than one of them. You might be a celestial immortal as well, but you might not know this. Our Axe Gang is a vassal of the Green Gang. The Green Gang has immortal kings and supremes. From the day you offended us, your fate was sealed. As soon as he finished speaking, Huang Aogu began to laugh hysterically. He glared at Yi Zichen viciously. He wasn't afraid of death. Even if his head fell to the ground, he'd still die with him. For some reason, Yi Zichen smiled. There was a hint of pity in his smile. The way he saw it, Huang Aogu was truly pitiful. Pity his narrow-mindedness. Pity his self-righteousness. Your Axe Gang is powerful. You can bully and rob whoever you want. If someone stole it from you, you would be unhappy and want to kill them. Who gave you the right to do that? Your Axe Gang isn't easy to bully, but does that mean I, Yi Zichen, am easy to bully? With a flip of his hand, an immortal sword appeared in his grasp. The tip of the sword descended upon Huang Aogu's neck. Kill me if you dare. As long as I die, my soul jade slip will shatter. At that time, gang leader will investigate the cause of my death and avenge me. You will also be hunted down by countless celestial immortals, and you will never be able to rest in peace. Ha ha! Pooh! The immortal sword in his hand didn't hesitate. With a flash of light, Huang Aogu's head fell to the ground. When his head was separated from his neck, he was still hysterical. As he landed, he stared intently at Yi Zichen, as if to say, "If I die, don't even think about living." The other captains were stunned. Their earlier terror paled in comparison to the shock of seeing Huang Aogu's head fall to the ground. He really was dead. By now, they didn't even dare look at Yi Zichen. They were afraid that if their gazes met, one of them would be the next to be beheaded. At the same time, Yi Zichen calmly put away his sword and looked at Huang Aogu's head. Sky immortals? Even immortal kings are nothing in my eyes. Yi Zichen ignored Huang Aogu's decapitated body and walked over to the captains. The captains stopped in their tracks, their legs trembling uncontrollably. As far as they were concerned, Yi Zichen was an emissary of the River Styx. He'd come to escort them to the River Styx. You. As soon as Yi Zichen spoke, several captains knelt and kowtowed repeatedly. As he looked at the kneeling captains, Yi Zichen retracted his cold expression and smiled warmly. Don't be afraid. I'm not a bloodthirsty person. Right now, you have two paths before you. Either follow me or die. What's your choice? The sun set. The afterglow of the sky was a blood red, so red that it looked like a fountain of fresh blood. Two corpses lay outside Raging Flame City. One was Huang Aogu, and the other was his trusted aide, Zhao Yi. In truth, when Yi Zichen gave him a choice, Zhao Yi had chosen to submit as well. However, when he considered his relationship with Huang Aogu, as well as the rift between him and Wei Jie, Yi Zichen decided he might as well get rid of him. The Axe Gang's branch in Raging Flame City had completely disappeared, replaced by Yi Zichen's new faction. Chaos. Only in times of chaos could heroes be born, and only in times of chaos could opportunities be found. Yi Zichen wanted to throw the God Realm into chaos. Only then could he secure a place on the God Realm's stable map. Raging Flame City was his starting point, but it wasn't his final destination. All of the Axe Gang's branch members were recruited as well. Upheaval's leader became Wei Jie's acting leader, and the former second captain of the Axe Gang made an exception and was promoted to vice leader. The other captains became Inner Hall elders. Quite a few of the stronger and more talented ordinary members became hall masters and other important positions. Upheaval's establishment was a starting point for Yi Zichen, but it was also an opportunity for the Axe Gang's members. Yi Zichen's new faction naturally didn't follow the old rules. He set up new rules for Upheaval, but he didn't return the money they'd stolen. The gang had only just been established, so it needed an enormous amount of money to recruit elites and maintain its normal operations. Upheaval's establishment didn't affect Raging Flame City's structure at all. Yi Zichen took over the Axe Gang's former territory, and the gang developed methodically. However, Raging Flame City's higher-ups were in a state of disarray. They were all trying to figure out what had happened to the Axe Gang. Why was Upheaval reborn? In short, Upheaval was established. Just as Upheaval was developing methodically, in the profound Great District's 18th District, the Axe Gang's main headquarters, every 7 days, a staff member would come in and clean the hall, which contained the soul slips of the gang's middle and upper echelons. Not a single one of these slips would break in 100 years, so the staff wouldn't pay too much attention to them. At that moment, the staff member came to clean the hall as usual, but just as he was about to close the door and leave, he discovered, among the thousands of slips, there were 2. Chapter 1070. Sir, your dishes are all here. Sir, I'm a pill refiner. The 100 Daybreaks Inn's waiter smiled radiantly, then poured Yi Zichen a cup of wine. The waiter felt as if spring had truly arrived. During Yi Zichen's stay, he'd made a ton of money. Given his status, it would be difficult for him to even find a wife. But just a few days ago, he found himself a beautiful young woman. Of course, part of this was because of his glib tongue, but most of it was because of his bulging pockets. Every night, he'd thank his sharp eyes for dragging Yi Zichen to the inn. He now regarded Yi Zichen as his savior and waited on him with utmost care. Sorry to trouble you, but I don't need you to take care of me. Go back to your business. He nodded at the waiter. The waiter was a tactful man. When he saw that there were quite a few people at the table, he knew they had business to discuss. He bowed and left the private room, then closed the curtains before leaving. At the same time, he warned the workers in the store not to let anyone get close to Yi Zichen's private room. After the waiter left, Yi Zichen waved his hand and placed a seal around his private room. He took a sip from his cup of immortal brew, and by Shaoxing poured him another. Go on. Yi Zichen minded his own business and ate. The 2 men sitting across from him flipped open their booklets and reported on Upheaval's recent developments. Boss, our gang has stabilized, and we've recruited all of the Axe Gang's former members. Add to that the fact that we've been recruiting new members, and our current scale is far greater than the Axe Gang's. We have 2,743 body cultivators, 1,140 false spiritual body cultivators, 120 spiritual body cultivators, 37 entering immortality cultivators, and 6 human immortals. The one reporting was none other than the scar-faced Wei Jie, the man Yi Zichen had promoted to gang leader. Back when he'd been gang leader, Yi Zichen had refined a furnace of pills for him to help him raise his cultivation. When he found out Yi Zichen was a pill refiner, Wei Jie was as dumbfounded as a wooden chicken. Then, he was overjoyed and even more determined to follow Yi Zichen. Wei Jie was already at the early stage of entering immortality. Sitting next to him was the current vice leader of the gang, Yuan Hua. Speaking of Yuan Hua, if it weren't for the fact that Zhao Yi had such a close relationship with Huang Aogu, Yuan Hua would have been the leader of the gang. If Yi Zichen hadn't killed Huang Aogu and Zhao Yi, he might have been stuck in second place for the rest of his life. Now that he'd joined Upheaval, he'd finally seen the light. He'd even become a deputy gang leader, a position of power and authority. He was extremely grateful to Yi Zichen. There are actually 6 human immortals? Yi Zichen put his chopsticks down on the table. He wasn't particularly surprised that there were so many body tempering and spiritual body level warriors. The 13th district didn't lack fighters of this level. As long as one had enough money, they could get as many as they wanted. What he cared about were the 6 human immortals. Although human immortals weren't much in the 72 districts, finding 6 human immortals in the Mortal Great District was no easy task. That's right. We are also quite surprised that you managed to recruit 6 human immortals. This time, we have also brought those 6 human immortals with us. Should we let them in to meet you? Yuan spoke up. After getting Yi Zichen's approval, he clapped his hands. Not long after, 5 men and a woman appeared in the private room. Your Excellency, these are the 6 human immortal experts we recruited. This young one is Talon, an early-stage human immortal. That chubby one is Li Mo, also an early-stage human immortal. And this one, Yuan smiled as he introduced them. Although he was a former member of the Axe Gang, He now considered himself a member of Upheaval. He was delighted to have recruited these human immortal experts. And this one, the only female of our 6 human immortals, Yujilan. Don't underestimate her, just because she's a woman, but she's a peak human immortal expert. Is that so? Yizicha nodded and smiled. Yujilan looked to be in her 30s. Her long, black hair was tied up in a bun, her figure was slender, and her waist was slender. Her eyes were especially alluring, and she looked like a ripe peach. Your Excellency. When she noticed Yi Zichen's gaze, Yujilan hurriedly bowed. However, her large, limpid eyes were misty as she looked Yi Zichen up and down. Clearly, she was very curious about him. Upheaval had been founded after suppressing the Axe Gang. Everyone in Raging Flames City knew this. Although Wei Jie and Yuan Hua had been pushed to the surface, everyone knew that they were merely spokespeople. There was someone else behind the scenes, especially since Upheaval had taken over the Axe Gang. That was the same as declaring war on the profound Great District's Axe Gang. Everyone thought they'd keep a low profile, but to everyone's astonishment, Upheaval only grew more and more high profile. They constantly expanded their influence and recruited new talents. This only made people even more curious about Upheaval's backer. Are you a bit disappointed? Yi Zichen could sense the 6 human immortals sizing him up. He smiled, but they just smiled sheepishly and didn't respond. However, in their hearts, they were somewhat disappointed. Yi Zichen was just too young. I know you've made your choices, but I can promise you right now that joining Upheaval is absolutely the best choice for you. Furthermore, in the near future, Upheaval will definitely become a peak-level faction in the 4 great districts, and perhaps even on the Divine Mountains. I have to say, you've got a good eye for joining us. With that, Yi Zichen waved his hand, and 6 bottles of pills appeared on the table. Here are 6 bottles of human immortal pills. You're all human immortal experts, so these pills should be the most valuable to you. Consider them a greeting gift for meeting me. As soon as the pills appeared, the human immortals were so shocked they couldn't speak. The 72 districts lacked pills the most, yet the mastermind behind their gang had just pulled out 6 bottles of human immortal pills. After all, these were 5th-grade immortal pills. Only a 5th-grade pill refiner could refine them. Seeing the expressions on the human immortal experts' faces, Wei Jie and Yuan Hua laughed. When Yi Zichen placed the pills in front of them, their expressions were the same. What are you standing around for? His Excellency gave them to you, so hurry up and take them. Yuan Hua smiled at them. The human immortals hurriedly put the pills away, as if they were afraid Yi Zichen would go back on his word. They uncorked the bottles, and when they smelled the refreshing fragrance, they were even more certain that these were human immortal pills. The human immortals couldn't calm down for a long time. After a while, the only female human immortal, Yujilan, clutched the pills and asked carefully, Your Excellency, these pills. My lord, this pill, did you make it? In order to make sure they did their best for the gang, Yi Zichen didn't bother hiding his smile and nodded. Chapter 1071. To spend money like water fortunately. He hadn't forgotten the pill refining techniques he'd learned from old Lord Taishan. Yi Zichen had Wei Jie and the others collect a few more medicinal herbs. Now, his identity as a pill refiner was confirmed. The 6 human immortal experts couldn't help but be overjoyed when they got the confirmation. Previously, they'd been a bit worried about Upheaval's future development. However, with a 5th-rank alchemist backing the gang, not even the profound Great District's Axe Gang would dare do anything to them. To be able to follow by the side of an alchemist was the pursuit of countless martial artists. As long as Yi Zichen spread the news of him being a pill refiner, the human immortals were certain that not to mention people of their level, even Sky Immortal experts would join them. Right now, they had to seize the opportunity in front of them. They were the first group to join. Even if other experts joined in the future, Yi Zichen would treat them well out of respect for the sake of their seniority. Wei Jie and Yuan Hua smiled and nodded. After seeing the gazes of the human immortal experts, Yuan Hua spoke up. Sect leader, and I still have matters to discuss with sir. You can all return to the sect. Yes. Without any hesitation, the human immortal experts left the private room. Seeing them being so obedient, whether it was Wei Jie or Yuan Hua, they both felt extremely pleased. It's too early for all of you to be happy. Yi Zichen was worried that the two of them would get carried away, so he couldn't help but pour a bucket of cold water on them. Human immortal experts are very strong in Immortal Great District, but in the future, we'll have to face the profound Great District headquarters and even the Sky Great District's Green Gang. That Yu Zhilan, I think he's about to make a breakthrough. It's very likely that he'll become the first Heaven Immortal in our sect. You guys have to focus on nurturing him. However, you must also learn to recognize people. Our gang does not accept crafty people. Yuan Hua and Wei Jie, who had been immersed in joy, instantly calmed down by this bucket of cold water. Just now, they had indeed gotten a little carried away. Actually, they couldn't be blamed. Anyone who had the power to control such a large force at the entering immortality level would have reacted the same way. Moreover, the time given to them to settle down was too short. It was inevitable that they would be complacent for a while. Yi Zichen was well aware of this, so he didn't blame them. He merely said a few words of advice. Withdrawing the glee in his heart, Wei Jie said with a serious expression, "This subordinate will remember my lord's teachings." Yi Zichen nodded at them, then placed his hands on the table. "Is there anything else to report?" As soon as he finished speaking, he discovered that both Wei Jie and Yuan Hua wore embarrassed smiles on their faces. Yi Zichen frowned at them, then saw Wei Jie scratch his head and smile wryly. "My lord, we don't have much money on hand." They lacked money. That was the main reason they came to report to Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen was stunned. He stared at the two of them as if he wanted to see right through them. "Say it again. I don't think I heard it clearly." When Upheaval was founded, Yi Zichen didn't hold back in the slightest. He gave them everything he'd stolen from the Axe Gang. He also knew that a large amount of funds would be needed when a faction was first established, so he left over 100,000 spirit coins for his own expenses. One had to know that he had given Wei Jie and the others a total of 300 million spirit coins. This amount of wealth was enough to establish a medium-sized clan in Flame City. It would be enough to last for 1,000 years. Upheaval had only been established for a short time, yet they were already running out of money. You two aren't trying to line your pockets with me, are you? When the water is too clear, there will be no fish. I can agree with that. I never expected you two to be so fair and honest. But that's 300 million. You're too corrupt. Sensing Yi Zichen's suspicions, Wei Jie and Yuan Hua smiled bitterly at each other, then took out a jade slip and handed it to him. "My lord, you've really wronged me and OL Yuan. Even if you wanted us to line our pockets, we'd have to have the opportunity to do so first. No, this is a report of Upheaval's recent use of funds. Please take a look." Yi Zichen didn't really suspect them. After all, it was better not to suspect people and not use them. However, he truly couldn't understand why they'd used up 300 million just like that. Yi Zichen accepted the jade slip, scanned it with his spiritual sense, and froze in shock. This wasn't just King spending money. This was practically burning money. "My lord, you've seen it for yourself, haven't you? You don't know how expensive food and fuel are unless you're in charge. Our gang has only just been established, yet you said you wanted to raise the overall strength of our members. Over the past few days, we've purchased large quantities of body-tempering pills, spirit-guiding pills, and other low-grade medicines from the Skyspan Trading Company. In truth, we paid a huge price to invite those 6 human immortals. We really don't have enough money." Wei Jie scowled. He'd never guessed that starting a proper gang would burn through so much money. If Yi Zichen hadn't forbidden them from becoming bandits, he would have sent Upheaval's members back to their old ways. Damn! Yi Zichen stared blankly as he read the jade slip's contents. Back in the lower realms, he'd started his own faction, but at the time, he had Zhuomo's treasure tower support. Furthermore, Xueqi and the others never asked him to worry about such things. He'd had no idea how tiring it was to maintain a faction. Now that he looked at it, he realized it really hadn't been easy. For a moment, he couldn't help but admire those gang leaders and sect leaders who worked so hard for the sake of their organizations. If you wanted wealth in front of others, you had to suffer behind them. On the surface, they seemed to have limitless glory, But who knew how much effort they put into maintaining the gang's normal operations? Yi Zichen tossed the jade slip onto the table and shook his head. We can't go on like this. Even if I'm a pill refiner, refining pills day and night won't fix this hole. We need to change our gang's previous rules. We can't provide them with cultivation resources for free. How about this? We'll set up a gang contribution system. Members can enter secret realms, offer up treasures, or donate spirit coins in exchange for contribution points. They can then use these points to purchase internal pills. As for how much the pills cost in the outside world, you could decide that. All right, then we'll go back and discuss it with the gang elders. When the time comes, we'll come up with a suitable plan for you to look over. Just like that, Wei Jie and Yuan Hua left the private room. Once they were gone, Yi Zichen turned to Bai Shaosheng and raised his eyebrows. They really spend money like water. Yi Zichen had no appetite for this meal. All he could think about was how to better maintain the gang's operations. After a few simple bites, he prepared to leave the private room and return to his room. However, he saw the inn's boss and other employees surrounding his door. Chapter 1072. Who did it? The owner of the 100 Daybreaks and was an honest-looking, middle-aged man. Due to the inn's booming business, he'd opened quite a few branches, so he usually wasn't here. This time, he'd returned because one of his employees had found him. When he heard the employee's description, he didn't dare tarry and hurried over. Standing in front of him was a young man with an arrogant face. He had a handsome face and was dressed luxuriously. However, his eyes were deep and sunken, and his temples weren't particularly full. His footsteps were weak, and he looked as if he'd had too much to drink. He was currently waving his hands, his eyelids drooping, and his lips trembling. He was surrounded by several attendants, all of them tall and sturdy. Judging from their auras, they were at least at the human immortal level. They were extraordinary. Young Master Kai, I'm here to apologize to you on behalf of my friend. He didn't know you'd reserved this room for years, and that you'd been away from Raging Flame City for the past few years. That's why he sold it. It's my fault for not telling them in advance. Please, for my sake, be magnanimous and let my friend go. The inn owner repeatedly pleaded for mercy on his employee's behalf, but the youth didn't give him any face. He grinned sinisterly. Give you face? Who do you think you are? You wanted to give you face? Your shop assistant sold my room to someone else. Which one of you is giving me face? As his voice faded, the young man shot a glance at his follower beside him and said, Beat him up. The attendants didn't suspect a thing. They rolled up their sleeves and prepared to attack. Hey, everyone, are you having a party in front of my room? Then please go somewhere else. I'm a light sleeper, so if there's even the slightest commotion outside, I won't be able to sleep. Yi Zichen yawned, scooted over, and was about to enter the room. When the owner saw Yi Zichen, he frowned. He'd never been here before, so he didn't recognize him. But since the owner of the room was here, the problem was much simpler. Dear guest, you're staying in the Sky Room, right? Our employee is new here, so he doesn't understand. In truth, this Sky Room is reserved by this young man, Kai, for years. How about you bear with it and let him have it? As for the cost of your room, I'll compensate you tenfold. How about that? 10 times the compensation was not a small amount. The owner of the inn said this because he wanted to quickly resolve this matter. Yi Zichen, who was about to enter his room, paused for a moment, then raised his eyebrows at the inn owner. Are you the boss? Yes, your humble servant is Kong San, the boss of this 100 Daybreaks Inn, said the boss with a smile. Boss Kong, sorry for my rudeness. Yi Zichen cupped his hands towards Kong San and smiled. You said that this room was reserved by this young master. I wonder if he paid a deposit? Kong San wanted to say something but then stopped. With his experience, there was no way he couldn't guess what Yi Zichen wanted to say. Kid, are you the guest of this guest room? Let me tell you, this guest room is reserved by our family's young master all year round. If you know what's good for you, quickly vacate this guest room and carefully clean it. Perhaps we can spare you this once on account of your ignorance. The bulky man beside young Master Kai roared angrily. Yi Zichen glanced at him and immediately knew that this grandson was a simple-minded person. He didn't want to lower himself to converse with his follower, so he still had a warm smile on his face. Did you pay a deposit? The young master, surnamed Kai, wasn't as brainless as his follower. Regardless of whether or not he'd reserved this room all year round, anyone who could stay in 100 daybreaks in heaven classroom was absolutely capable. Furthermore, judging from Yi Zichen's extraordinary bearing and the person behind him, he might be the young master of some family clan. He'd come here for business. If he could avoid unnecessary trouble, it was best not to. After a moment's thought, young Master Kai cupped his hands and smiled. Brother, I am Kai Renfei of the profound Great District's Kai family. My follower spoke rudely just now. Please don't take offense. It's true that I've never paid a deposit, but Boss Kong, you know full well that this room is. What's the point of making a verbal reservation if you haven't paid a deposit? I used real spirit coins to stay here. If you want to talk about priority, you'll have to wait until I've stayed here long enough. This and has plenty of other guest rooms, so you can stay elsewhere. What's the point of arguing with me? With that, Yi Zichen shoved Kai Renfei aside with such force that he slammed him into the hallway's walls. Look at your frail body. If you have the time to act tough, you might as well train yourself. Impudent. As he spoke, Kai Renfei's subordinates swung their arms and charged at him. Yi Zichen glanced at them coolly. Bang, bang, bang. He flung his subordinates into a corner of the hallway. The others, who'd been helping Kai Renfei up, saw this and wanted to rush up in anger. Stop! After stopping his subordinates, Kai Renfei pushed himself against the wall and climbed to his feet. Senior, you're right. This junior's body is indeed a bit weak. I really need to train myself. If you like this room, then let's let you stay here. I'll look for another. Kai Renfei smiled. When Yi Zichen pushed him aside, he was incomparably furious. However, when he saw that Yi Zichen had tossed his subordinates aside with a wave of his hand, he was obviously a peerless expert. This wasn't the profound Great District, nor was it the Kai family's home. It was best for him to keep a low profile. Kai Renfei smiled amiably at Yi Zichen and nodded, then prepared to lead his subordinates to another room. Wait a moment. When he saw that Kai Renfei was about to leave, Yi Zichen called him to a halt. He walked up to one of his subordinates and placed his hand on his shoulder. The assistant, whose face was swollen like a pig's, sensed that someone was touching him. He struggled to open his narrowed eyes. Sir, Yi Zichen nodded at him, his heart aching, then narrowed his eyes at Kai Renfei and the others. Who hit him? Kai Renfei said nothing. Given his status, he naturally wouldn't hit a servant himself. At that moment, an early-stage human immortal follower stepped forward and snorted arrogantly. I hit him. He did something to our family's young master. Before the worldly immortal follower could finish his words, he felt a huge impact on his chest. With a loud crack, he fell heavily to the back. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his expression withered. Senior. Kai Renfei was infuriated. He thought he'd given Yi Zichen enough face, yet Yi Zichen had actually hit his subordinate for the sake of servant. That fellow is my brother. How could I just watch him get beaten up for no reason? Yi Zichen's indifferent expression stunned Kai Renfei. Yi Zichen's gaze was far too terrifying. He swallowed his words. Chapter 1073. A landscape painting. When Yi Zichen said that, the temperature in the hallway of the guest room dropped to a freezing point. Kai Renfei's expression fluctuated for a long time. Remember, he was a tyrant in the profound Great District, with the Kai family behind him. When had he ever suffered such humiliation? He clenched his fists, and his body trembled. It was obvious he was on the verge of exploding. Kai! The innkeeper braced himself and tried to smooth things over, but to his surprise, after a few moments of hesitation, Kai Renfei smiled kindly and nodded. Then I'll listen to you, senior. Kai Renfei cupped his hands respectfully, then led his subordinates out of the corridor. When he left the 100 Daybreaks Inn, he stood in front of it and stared at it for a long time. Young master, are we just going to let it go? Asked one of the attendants, a peak human immortal expert. He'd followed this young master for so long. He knew he wasn't someone who'd be so easy to talk to. Kai Renfei looked away, his expression incomparably dark. His gloomy face was so dark it seemed as if it were on the verge of exploding. His arms trembled violently, as if he were doing all he could to suppress the raging fury in his heart. A bunch of trash. Chiron Fei viciously cursed his subordinates. They lowered their heads, not daring to breathe too loudly. Even the heavily injured followers tried their best not to let out a painful gasp. Chiron Fei glanced coldly at the attendants beside him, then took out a few pills from his bosom and tossed them to the injured attendants. The attendants caught the pills and thanked him profusely. Chiron Fei then opened his mouth and said, "What are you doing here? A mighty dragon cannot suppress a local serpent. That kid just now isn't simple." Although the Kai family is a major family in the profound Great District, this is still Raging Flame City. Furthermore, the clan elders aren't here yet. The less trouble, the better. I'll endure this enmity for now, but I, Chiron Fei, am absolutely not easy to bully. No matter what, don't let me see him in the profound Great District. When the time comes, I'll definitely teach him a lesson. He glanced sinisterly at the 100 Daybreaks Inn. Chiron Fei would never forget the humiliation he'd suffered just now. A gentleman's revenge is never too late, but a villain's revenge is unscrupulous. This debt had to be repaid sooner or later. Let's go. Chiron Fei's departure caused Kong San to be unable to help but heave a sigh of relief. However, based on his understanding of that young master, he would absolutely not let this matter go. Looking at the series of previous performances, that young master seemed to be very afraid of this young master in front of him. But he wasn't afraid of him, Kong San. Thinking of this, Kong San felt a little apprehensive. He was a little worried that Chiron Fei would put the blame on him. With no other choice, he could only summon a shop assistant and reluctantly take out a famous painting from his spatial ring and hand it over to the shop assistant. He repeatedly instructed the shop assistant to deliver it to young Master Kai and properly apologized to him. Although the waiter was unwilling, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and agree. Kong San watched the waiter leave, then looked towards Yi Zichen. Yi Zichen squatted in front of the beaten employee, wiped his face with his palm, and instantly, his swollen face returned to normal. "It must have been hard on you." Yi Zichen patted the waiter's shoulder with a wry smile. "It's my fault for not being able to avenge you. Don't blame me. But Chiron Fei is a young master of the profound Great District. I don't know his background, so I can't be too ruthless." Yi Zichen's words came from the bottom of his heart. Right now, his foundation was truly unstable. If he were alone before, he'd naturally have nothing to fear and nothing to lose. But now that he'd established the Chaos Sect, his heart was in danger. He really had to think things through carefully. The waiter laughed foolishly and shook his head. He understood Yi Zichen's difficulties. "Here's 50,000 spirit coins." As he spoke, he pulled a spatial pouch from his spatial ring and shoved it into the waiter's hands. "I heard you're about to get married. Consider this a gift from your big brother." "Sir," the waiter's eyes flashed with gratitude. He really was about to get married, but it was still a long time away. Yi Zichen was clearly giving him money because he felt guilty about being beaten up and wanted to make it up to him. However, the beating had nothing to do with Yi Zichen at all. For a moment, the waiter didn't know what to say. All he could do was clench the pouch and thank Yi Zichen repeatedly. "All right, go back to your business." "All right." The waiter nodded and left. Constance saw all of this. He looked around, then cupped his hands at Yi Zichen. "I've caused you trouble." He was just being polite. In terms of trouble, the way Kong San saw it, Yi Zichen was the real problem. To his surprise, Yi Zichen nodded non-committally and smiled. "So you know you've caused trouble for me? In that case, shouldn't you compensate me for my losses?" This wasn't Yi Zichen taking the opportunity to extort money. This was, of course, trouble. Kong San was a descendant of a major family in the profound Great District. The two of them shouldn't have crossed paths, but because of a guest room, they'd become enemies. Fortunately, he'd run into Yi Zichen. If it were anyone else, they might have lost their life. Wasn't this trouble? Kong San smiled bitterly. He was a small merchant from Raging Flame City. He couldn't afford to offend Chiron Fei, but neither could he afford to offend this man. He steeled his resolve and took out a landscape painting from his spatial ring. He'd won it at the Skyspan Trading Company's auction a dozen or so years ago. Apparently, it contained the Tao of the 5 elements. In the 72 districts, with a strong parade on the week, no one cared about reason. Kong San wanted to improve his strength further, so he'd spent a fortune on the painting. However, after studying it for several years, he hadn't comprehended even the slightest bit of its mysteries. He naturally didn't suspect the Skyspan Trading Company of lying to their customers. If the Skyspan Trading Company said it contained the Tao of the 5 elements, then it definitely did. If he hadn't comprehended it, that could only mean his comprehension skills weren't good enough. Leaving the painting in his possession would be a waste. He might as well take it out and offer it to the Buddha. Painting? How much is it? How about you give me some cash? Luxury items like landscape paintings were for the old antiques of major family clans. Upheaval had just been established, and he was short on cash. Giving him landscape paintings was better than giving him actual spirit coins. Kong Sen laughed bitterly. This guy really wasn't stupid. He actually wanted him to give him some cash. But if he really had to take a discount, he really couldn't take out that much cash. My lord, this isn't an ordinary landscape painting. I bought it at the Skyspan Trading Company's auction a dozen or so years ago. It contains the 5 elements of heaven and earth. I heard the trading company say it's hiding a great secret. The 5 elements of heaven and earth? A great secret? Why don't you show me? Chapter 1074. The man in the painting blue skies, clear waters, mountains, and white clouds. On the surface, this was just an ordinary landscape painting, and one could not feel the charm within it. It was likely that the value for people to appreciate it was negligible. However, when Yizichin grabbed the painting, he saw it move. The clouds in the blue sky moved with the wind, and ripples appeared on the surface of the lake. At the end of the lake was a bamboo raft. A man stood on it, wearing a conical bamboo hat. He drifted toward the center of the lake with a bamboo pole. As he drew closer, Yizichin could even hear a few faint sighs. Time. Fate. The sigh lingered in Yizichin's ears like demonic music. His heart trembled, and his blood surged. In his panic, Yizichin tore his gaze away from the painting. He clutched his chest and gasped for breath. But when he tried to recall what he'd seen, he couldn't. This painting, when he looked at it again, Yizichin felt a twinge of apprehension. By now, he no longer viewed it as a simple landscape painting. In just a few breaths of time, he felt his mind become so disturbed by the painting. His blood surged. If he looked at it for too long, who knew what would happen? This painting was simply too demonic. Yizichin didn't want it, but the memories he'd extracted from it made him want to accept it. Just what had he experienced in the painting? How could he be like this? Yizichin forcibly suppressed his roiling blood and rolled up the painting. Kongson looked on enviously. Although he didn't know what Yizichin had experienced in the painting, he could tell from his expression that the painting's meaning. He'd held the painting for over 10 years, but all he'd seen was an ordinary landscape. It seemed that although he'd bought the painting, it wasn't fated to be with him. I'll accept the painting, but I won't take it for free. This is a jade slip I made. If you fall into danger, so long as you crush it, I'll do everything within my power to save your life. In truth, he made this life-saving jade slip for Wu Di, but Wu Di was still within the range of his immortal sense, so there was no point in giving it to him. This landscape painting definitely held some sort of great secret. Kong San had given him such a precious painting, and he wouldn't be able to rest easy if he just took it for free. He might as well give the jade slip to Kong San. Later, when Wu Di separated from him, he could rebrand it. This, Kong San was terrified. In reality, he couldn't comprehend this painting here either. He originally wanted to borrow the flower to offer the Buddha, but he didn't expect the other party to return the courtesy. Yizichin was able to heavily injure several human immortals with a wave of his hand. That meant that Yizichin was at least above the Earth immortal level. As long as he accepted the jade slip, he would have one more life-saving trump card. However, this was a bit precious, so he hesitated. I told you to take it, so take it. If you don't want it, just destroy it. Yizichin tossed the jade slip to Kong San, then led by Xiaosheng back to the guest room without even looking back. Boss, Is this painting really as divine as Kong-san says? When Yizichin unfurled the painting, Genkai couldn't help but glance at it out of curiosity. However, aside from mountains and rivers, he really couldn't see anything else. Yizichin nodded calmly. He didn't immediately study the painting. Instead, he said on the table, "By Xiaosheng, I have some things to tell you." "Go ahead, boss," said Bai Xiaosheng solemnly. "Investigate that Chiron phase background for me, as well as where he's been staying and what he's been up to recently. That kid's a bit different from ordinary silk pants. He's a bit shrewd. The more he's like that, the blacker his heart is. I'm worried he'll cause trouble for us behind our backs." Yizichin hated dealing with shrewd silk pants the most. Just now, he hadn't given him any face, yet he'd endured it all and left with a smile on his face. This sort of person was too scheming. He had to be on his guard. No one could say what he'd do once he got back. If he just tossed him to the back of his mind, he might get into big trouble. When Yizichin heard that, Bai Xiaosheng nodded and left. Yizichin continued, "It seems my apprentice Wu Di's family is about to participate in the clan's grand competition. For the next few days, I might have to go into seclusion and study this landscape painting. If my apprentice gets bullied during the competition, don't hesitate. Tell Wei Jie to go to the Wu family and avenge him." "Understood." After explaining everything, Bai Xiaosheng left the room. Yizichin's heart thumped wildly. He couldn't help but walk up to the painting, hesitating over whether or not to open it. The sensation of his blood surging through his veins still lingered in his heart. He was certain that if he hadn't retreated in time, he might have been injured. "I refuse to believe this painting can be so demonic." Yizichin refused to believe it. He walked up to the bed, sat cross-legged, gnashed his teeth, and unfurled the painting once more. When he looked at it again, it was still blue skies, clear waters, mountains, and white clouds. When he looked away from the painting, his memories returned to his sea of consciousness. That bamboo hat man. Yizichin knew that he'd suffered a setback at the bamboo hat man's hands. He was on high alert as he waited for him to appear. When the ripples appeared on the lake's surface, a bamboo raft appeared at the end of the mountain range. The man on the raft was still wearing his bamboo hat. He pushed against the surface of the lake, stirring up the ripples. It seemed like the raft was very far from the center of the lake, but in the blink of an eye, it seemed to have teleported to the center of the lake. "Time. Fate," the bamboo hat man muttered softly. Yizichin remembered his earlier setback. He held his breath, concentrated, and did his best to resist the demonic sound. The one who spoke wasn't the one on the raft. When he saw this, Yizichin's heart trembled. He'd always assumed it was the man in the bamboo hat who'd spoken. He never would have guessed it was someone else. In an instant, a tea table appeared on the bamboo hat, and two people sat on both sides of the tea table. One of them wore a maroon imperial robe, but his hair was a complete mess. There were even a few strands of white hair mixed into his lush black hair. His expression was desolate as he gripped his wine cup and smiled bitterly. "I, the five elements' great emperor, have roamed free and unfettered my entire life. Yet I've ended up like this." Just from his sorrowful tone, it was easy to sense the desolation in his heart. At that moment, the man in the golden imperial robe and crown snorted, "Five elements, great emperor, I inherited the crepe myrtle starlight. I am the legitimate heir of the myriad Daos. Why don't you accept this?" Chapter 1075. Chapter 1075, Destruction of the Five Elements. "I'm afraid I've seen something incredible." Yizichin sighed inwardly as he studied the landscape painting. He'd already guessed that the two men on the raft were unfathomable figures of the god realm. Everything had its karma. When he heard this, he wanted to withdraw his consciousness from the painting. He might be a tyrant in the 72 districts, but in the context of the 9 divine mountains, he wouldn't even count as a small shrimp. Being tainted by the karma of such peerless existences was no good. Should I leave? Yizichin asked himself over and over again. Taking advantage of the fact that he hadn't been tainted by karma yet, it might be best to leave as soon as possible. But deep in his heart, Yizichin wanted to keep watching. This was a top secret. Ordinary people had no chance of seeing it. I doubt a peerless existence like that would notice a nobody like me. Damn it, I've already seen this much karma. What's there to be afraid of? After a moment's hesitation, he steeled his resolve and continued watching. The scene in the landscape painting changed. The bamboo raft swayed, and the boatman wearing a bamboo hat disappeared from the boat. The mountains in the distance disappeared as well. Only this small bamboo raft and the two supreme beings sitting cross-legged on the bamboo raft remained in the world within the painting. In response to the five elements' great emperor's questions, the golden-robed man shook his head and laughed. He didn't agree with the five elements' great emperor's words. You say I usurped your celestial fate, stole your good fortune, and stole your rightful position. Do you have any proof? The bleak five elements' great emperor smiled indifferently. In an instant, his aura surged, but the rippling surface of the lake calmed down. Out of the two emperors of Tianza, I am the leader of the nine heavens. Do you dare say you didn't usurp my celestial fate? The myriad Taos of heaven and earth serve me, and the great Tao of the five elements surrounds me. Do you dare say you didn't steal my good fortune? The myriad races worship me and call me emperor. I am the leader of the Yao and demons. Do you dare say you didn't steal my rightful position? The three questions exploded like thunder. The winds howled, and the sun and moon trembled. The five elements' great emperor stared at the golden-robed man with bloodshot eyes. The fury in his heart erupted like a volcano. Just by looking at this landscape painting, one could feel the imposing aura coming from it. It was as if all living things in the world would bow down to it. Yi Zichen had to admit he'd never seen such an aura before. On the contrary, the golden-robed man acted as if he did not feel the monstrous anger in front of him. He lifted the wine pot and filled his cup to the brim. When the cup was placed back on the table, he smiled faintly. But the current God Emperor is me. The man in the golden robe stood up from the bamboo raft with a chuckle. He looked at the lake that was so far away that he could not see the end of it. He stood on the bamboo raft with his hands behind his back. No matter how much you say, the current God Emperor of the God Clan is me, right? That's why I called you despicable, the five elements' great emperor shouted through gritted teeth. No matter what the five elements' great emperor said, the golden-robed man stood indifferently on the bamboo raft. He didn't retort. After a long while, ripples appeared on the surface of the lake once more. Only then did he turn around and look at the five elements' great emperor indifferently. Winner takes all, isn't that so? You should know that I don't want to kill you. Hand over the great Tao of the five elements, and I can spare your life. Ha ha. The five elements' great emperor threw his head back and laughed uproariously. His laughter caused the surface of the lake to explode. Countless splashes of water splashed onto the bamboo raft, drenching everyone on it. You want the orthodox five elements? Dream on. With that, the five elements' great emperor's expression darkened. He roared in fury. Rain falls, wind rises, lightning appears, thunder rolls, fire burns. Instantly, a torrential downpour descended from the sky, and fierce winds howled without end. Lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled in the azure sky. Countless strands of heavenly fire fell from the sky to the center of the lake, where they burned fiercely. This is the five elements of heaven and earth that you've always wanted. Unfortunately, Zhou Wu, you'll never be able to obtain this emperor's power of the five elements. Even if I have to destroy it, I won't be able to unify your Taos. You'll never be able to take that final step. In an instant, a pair of hands that were large enough to cover the entire sky reached out from the sky. The golden-robed man's expression changed drastically. He formed a seal with both hands, and an illusory image of a hand that was not much weaker than the giant hand moved towards the giant hand, as if he wanted to stop it from descending. Laughable. The five elements' great emperor laughed arrogantly. He pushed his right hand down, and the giant hands in the sky followed his movements and slammed down on the lake. The golden-robed man's giant hands were shattered by the giant hands in the sky. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his eyes flashed with fear. His golden robes fell off his body, and he transformed into a scarecrow that landed on the bamboo raft. Five elements, how dare you? He never would have guessed that the golden-robed man on the raft was just a substitute. A thunderous roar boomed out from the ends of the sky. The five elements' great emperor's expression was one of unbridled arrogance. He narrowed his eyes at the ends of the sky, then his gaze filled with madness. "Zhou Wu, you'll never be able to take that final step again. Ha ha ha, you think you've defeated me, but I haven't lost either." The giant hands covered the sky and descended. Instantly, the five elements' great emperor's Tao of the five elements vanished, along with the lake, the sky, and the bamboo raft. Heaven and earth disappeared, and what came into view was boundless darkness. Yi Zichen, who'd witnessed it all, was shaken to the core. His body trembled uncontrollably. Everything had vanished. He didn't know what had happened after the painting, but even so, he could sense the power contained within that giant hand that blotted out the sky, enough to destroy the world. Had the five elements' great emperor really destroyed the Tao of the five elements? If that was the case, how could he still comprehend the power of the five elements? Junior. At this moment, a burly man walked out of the chaos. He wore a purplish-red dragon robe and sat on a dragon throne with ferocious dragon eyes. Although his expression was calm, he radiated power without being angry. Yi Zichen was astonished. This was none other than the five elements' great emperor from the painting. "Since you obtained my landscape painting, you must be fated with me. I don't know if you're a man or a woman, or if you're proficient in the five elements. But since you can see this, it means you've been tainted by my and Zhou Wu's karma. There are 3 scrolls of this landscape painting, all of which I painted when I was alive. This painting is also the key to my tomb. That traitor Zhou Wu stole my celestial fate, stole my good fortune, and stole my rightful position. When I was alive, he plotted against me, and I died a horrible death. But if I don't get my revenge, I won't be able to rest easy. If you're fated to collect all 3 paintings, enter my tomb. I left you good fortune there." Chapter 1076. There was no way. The painting shattered. When Yi Zichen's consciousness left the painting, he gulped and collapsed onto his bed, gasping for breath. His entire body was drenched in sweat. Even his bed was covered in a pool of cold sweat. What made him even more astonished was that after leaving the painting this time, he could actually remember every scene in the painting clearly. It seemed he'd gained the five elements' great emperor's approval, which was why he hadn't stolen his memories. The five elements' great emperor's final words reverberated through his mind. His heart pounded wildly, but Yi Zichen instinctively called out, "Zhou! Zhou!" However, before he could say a single word, Yi Zichen hurriedly covered his mouth and swallowed the rest of his words. At their level, even the mention of their names would probably cause the heavenly Tao to tremble. Now that he was tainted by the five elements' great emperor's karma, he had to be careful. What's more, the five elements' great emperor wanted him to get revenge. If the golden-robed man knew he was on the five elements' great emperor's side, he might just kill him with a wave of his hand. Yi Zichen frowned, then pulled countless jade slips from his spatial ring. He'd plundered them from the Axe Gang, and they contained brief descriptions of the peak factions and major figures of the God Realm's divine mountains. After 6 whole hours, Yi Zichen read through so many jade slips that his head felt like it was about to explode. The jade slips slipped onto the bed. Then Yi Zichen stared blankly at the wall. God Emperor. The Zhou Wu, the five elements' great emperor mentioned in the painting, was none other than the current leader of the God race, the leader of the God race, who stood at the very center of the divine mountain. The God Emperor. He's toying with me. Yi Zichen was about to go crazy. The golden-robed thief in the painting was actually the God Emperor? Was this a joke? He was just a minor immortal king. He hadn't even finished converting his divine power to a supreme yet. The leader of the God realm, the God Emperor, was at least a ruler-level expert. Getting revenge on someone like that? He lost his mind? Not to mention seeking revenge. This kind of existence would probably be able to kill him 100 times over with a wave of his hand before he could even reach the other party. Revenge? No such thing exists. However, if the five elements' great emperor could contend with the God Emperor, then he was definitely an expert on the same level. The wealth he left behind would probably be enough to buy all 72 districts and still have enough to spare. Moreover, at his level, the fortune he left behind was not just wealth, but also legacies. If he could obtain the inheritance, wouldn't that mean that he would be standing at the top of the food chain in this world? At that time, the God Emperor might not be so terrifying in his eyes. Yi Zichen laughed foolishly. At that moment, he didn't even know whether he was laughing or crying. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't tempted by the 5 elements' great emperor's legacy. But if he did, then he would be making an enemy out of the current leader of the God realm, the God Emperor. No matter how one looked at it, this was an extremely risky deal. 5 elements elder, although I've seen the story in your painting, I sympathize with what you've been through. But this kid's strength is too shallow. I'm afraid there's little hope of avenging you. How about this? Let me think about it. Moreover, I only have a painting right now, so I can't touch your inheritance. Right now, my thoughts are a bit chaotic. You're making me think about it. Yi Zichen didn't care whether or not the 5 elements' great emperor could hear him. With that, he tossed the painting into his spatial ring. Out of sight, out of mind. He couldn't help but be on tenterhooks when he saw this painting. It was best not to dwell on it for now. Yi Zichen sat on his bed and tried to calm himself. Then, he pushed open the door and walked downstairs. "Sir, you're out." When the attendant saw Yi Zichen, he hurriedly ran over. "I've kept your private room open for you. Are you still the same as before?" Yi Zichen stood on the first floor of the inn and looked at the attendant in bewilderment. Then, he instantly realized something and frowned. "How long was I in my room?" 3 days, replied the attendant. When Yi Zichen heard that, he was stunned. He hadn't expected to spend so much time looking at a painting. He'd assumed it had only been a few hours at most, but 3 days had already passed. Yi Zichen nodded, walked into his private room, and sat down. Only then did he notice that the attendant was dressed differently. "You? Yeah. Our shopkeeper has promoted me to the position of shopkeeper. This is all thanks to you. If it weren't for you, this little one wouldn't have been able to do it." The shop assistant smiled as he scratched his head and immediately opened his mouth to speak. "In order to thank you, let me treat you to a meal." He hadn't expected Kong San to be so good at handling things. He knew this attendant was on good terms with him, so he'd promoted him to manager. It seemed he was expressing his goodwill. Although Yi Zichen didn't lack money for a meal, he couldn't refuse such kindness. He nodded in agreement. "I wonder how my little disciple is doing. If I count the days, it should be time for the clan's grand competition." Whether it was revenge against the God Emperor or the 5 elements' great emperor's good fortune, that wasn't something he should be thinking about right now. Since he had nothing better to do, Yi Zichen decided he might as well spread out his immortal awareness. The Wu family in the northern part of the city. The clan's grand competition was a grand occasion for the Wu family, especially since it would decide the next city lord. Countless clans had hurried over to watch. They had no choice but to come. This competition would affect the next city lord, so they had to observe in advance. When the time came, they'd be on good terms with the family most likely to have a new city lord. Although the Wu family's residence wasn't small, there were far too many spectators. On this day, it was especially crowded. The location of the clan's competition was the clan's training field. The training field occupied an extremely vast area, and there was a circle of pavilions around the training field. Both the north and south sides of the pavilions were filled with spectators. In the east sat the 3 great clans of Raging Flame City, as well as the 2 major factions of the city, Skyspan Tower and Yi Zichen's Upheaval. In truth, the Wu family didn't want to invite them at first, but when they thought about it, they were a new faction that had just taken over the Axe Gang. They weren't quite sure what to make of it, so they invited them as well. The true leaders of these 5 forces were sitting at the very front of the east side, where they could directly see the entire situation in the martial arts practice field. Family Head Wu, with so many clansmen here, I'm afraid it'll take several days before the results are out. You call us all here so early. I'm afraid you're wasting our time. The speaker was the current city lord of Raging Flame City, as well as the current head of the Wang family, WNG Lei. He was tall and sturdy, and looked like an honest and upright man. However, the 100-year deadline was just around the corner. In the past, clans competed based on their top experts, but this time, the other two clans wanted to compete on the younger generation. This infuriated him, so much so that he was in a particularly bad mood. He was intentionally looking for trouble. Chapter 1077. Spirit Steely WNG Lay was purposefully making trouble. Everyone was here, but now he wanted them all to leave. He was clearly trying to humiliate the Wu family. It's indeed a bit of a waste of time. The Liu family head smiled and nodded. Not long ago, he'd worked with the Wu family head to force City Lord Lin to decide the City Lord's position based on the younger generation. However, that didn't mean the two families were on good terms. They were simply united in the face of profit. The smaller families watching from both sides knew that the relationships between the two families weren't as harmonious as they seemed on the surface. They couldn't help but look over, curious to hear how the Wu family head was going to break this stalemate. Wei Jia and the Skyspan Trading Company's administrator remained silent. The conflict between the two families had nothing to do with them. City Lord, Liu family head, please calm down. The head of the Wu family, who was sitting in the middle, smiled. He was a little chubby, and when he smiled, the flesh on his face trembled. We also know that following the rules of the previous competitions would be a waste of everyone's time. Everyone's time is precious, and it's not easy for you to participate in our Wu family's competition. How could we possibly waste your time? For this competition, the Wu family will forego the previous one-on-one rules and adopt a new one. Then how does the Wu family head intend to compete this time? WG Lei arched his brows and smiled. Please wait a moment. In the center of the arena, countless Wu family descendants rubbed their fists and palms, eagerly staring at the other clansmen around them. If this was like the previous competitions, they would all be enemies. Wu Di stood in the corner of the crowd. He didn't have a good relationship with the Wu family, whether it was the direct line of descent or the collateral line. It was only when Zheng Yunan was by his side that he didn't feel so lonely. In the center of the younger generation stood a young man who was like the moon surrounded by stars. He was surrounded by young people, and it was obvious that he was the leader. This was the Wu family head's son, Wu Chong. Most of the people around him were direct descendants. Big brother Chong, that brat Wu Di is here too. Should we teach him a lesson? The one who spoke was Li Wanlong's son, Li Kai. No one knew what Li Wanlong had fed his son, but his injuries, which would have taken him 3 months to recover, were all healed before the clan grand competition. There's no need for that. Someone will take care of a small fry like him. My only enemy in this tournament is him. His eyes looked into the distance, and coincidentally, a pair of eyes also looked at him. Wu Hai, the owner of that gaze, smiled at Wu Chong before withdrawing his gaze. This person was none other than Wu Hai, one of the most popular members of the Wu clan. Not only was Wu Hai handsome, his talent was also very high. Half a year ago, he had already entered immortality. No one knew how strong he was now. He was also a thorn in Wu Chong's side in this competition. Before the competition, Wu Chong's father had found him and told him that the winner of this competition would be given a condensing immortal pill. This pill could increase the chances of entering immortal expert breaking through to human immortal by more than 20%. In terms of cultivation, he might not be able to beat Wu Hai, but the branch family members spent most of their time adventuring in secret realms. In terms of fighting, it would be very difficult for him to beat Wu Hai. He was determined to get his hands on this pill, but Wu Hai was like a ferocious tiger, blocking his way. However, his father had said that he would have an absolute advantage in this competition. He just didn't know how this competition would go. Brother Hai, look at Wu Chong. He's very afraid of you. The side family members also sneered. Wu Hai was dressed in a white robe, like an elegant young master. His every movement attracted the attention of the surrounding girls. He's just a piece of trash who's been given pills. But we can't let our guard down. Who knows if his old man leaked any information to him in advance. Wu Hai was very disdainful of people like Wu Chong, who'd use pills to forcibly raise their strength. The only person in this clan that I can take seriously is Zheng Yunan. Unfortunately, she won't be participating. Sister Nin won't be participating? The surrounding branch family descendants arched their brows. Wu Hai realized that he'd misspoken. He smiled faintly and didn't bring up the matter again. How about it? The competition is right around the corner. Are you nervous? Zheng Yunan smiled warmly from the corner. However, the strange thing was that she was wearing women's clothes today. She looked like a young lady about to get married. She gently rested her chin on her hand and looked at the silent Wu Di. She smiled serenely. A little, I guess. Wu Di wanted to say some harsh words, but with so many family clans watching, he didn't dare. Why are you wearing that? He asked. It'll be very inconvenient to fight like this. Me? Heh, you don't need to worry about that. Just focus on your own competition. A woman's heart was like a needle in a haystack. Wu Di couldn't figure out why Zheng Yunan would wear such clothes on such an important day. Right now, his entire focus was on the competition. Whether it was for himself, for his mother, or to not disappoint his master, he couldn't lose. At this moment, a horse carriage arrived at the entrance of the martial arts practice field. All of the Wu family's heirs turned to look at it. This, despicable. There was a stone tablet atop the carriage. When he saw it, Wu Hai's handsome face turned ashen. In contrast, when Wu Chong saw the tablet, his face lit up with delight. It's actually a spirit tablet. Family head Wu, you really are generous. When the stone tablet appeared, the Skyspan Trading Company's executive smiled. The surrounding family clans froze. A spirit tablet. If you infused it with spiritual energy, you'd be able to see the person's strength. Spirit tablets couldn't be faked, so it was an accurate way to measure one's strength. However, they were expensive to build and could only be seen in the profound Great District and above. Families that possessed them were at least peak-level clans. If I'm not mistaken, this tablet seems to belong to the profound Great District's Kai family. I made it myself, so I have a vague impression of it. Executive Gua is correct. For the sake of this competition, our Wu family specially borrowed this tablet from the Kai family. Family head Wu's voice brimmed with pride. The surrounding family heads froze. To be able to borrow a precious treasure like the spirit steel was a clear indication that the relationship between the Wu family and the Kai family was no small matter. The fact that the Wu family didn't produce any earth or sky immortals already made quite a few families itch to replace him. Now, however, with the profound Great District's Kai family's connection, they had to think twice before dealing with the Wu family. Not just dealing with them, but the position of City Lord. Chapter 1078. Kai Tong, Family Head Wu, you're truly capable. City Lord WNG Lei snorted ambiguously. The Wu family had brought up the profound Great District's Kai family. Weren't they clearly saying this for them to hear? The current head of the Liu family smiled calmly, but didn't say anything else. In the eyes of ordinary aristocratic families, the profound Great District's Kai family was an enormous power, but to the Liu and Wang families, who had operated in Raging Flame City for hundreds, even thousands of years, it was unlikely they'd be able to rely on the Kai family's name to make them give up. In terms of foundation, the Liu family was the most mysterious, while the Wang family had served as city lord for more than 10 generations. Naturally, their foundations weren't weak either. Although the Kai family was a peak family clan in the profound Great District, they weren't strong enough to hold their own in the region. When he saw the expressions of his two old rivals, the Wu family head narrowed his beady eyes and smiled. He naturally didn't believe that the spirit steel alone was enough to make those two give up their positions as city lords. He had an even more explosive trump card up his sleeve. He carefully placed the steel in the center of the arena. Moments later, several figures appeared at the arena's entrance. The leader was an elderly man in purple robes with a mustache. His back was slightly hunched, but his skinny body exuded an oppressive aura that made one's heart palpitate. He was at least a peak Earth immortal expert, perhaps even a sky immortal. A handsome youth stood beside him. If Yizichen were present, he would definitely recognize him. This was none other than Kyron Fei, the one who defended him at the 100 Daybreaks Inn. They were accompanied by several attendants, all of whom had extraordinary auras. At the very least, they were human immortal experts. Kai Tong, why is the Kai family's third grand elder here? Perhaps the Wu family had paid an exorbitant price to borrow the steel from the Kai family, and there was no problem with the Kai family sending people to ensure its safety. However, Wan Tong had come in person. This was a rather serious problem. Kai Tong had been the head of the Kai family, and the current head of the Kai family was his son. Due to his lofty status, he usually stayed in the spirit mountain of the Kai clan, just like the other grand elders of the clan. He would only make an appearance when the clan was on the brink of destruction and could be considered a reclusive figure. Now, he had personally come to the Wu family, and if he wasn't mistaken, he was accompanied by the eldest son of the Kai family, Kai Renfei. Elder Kai, what brings you here? The moment Kai Tong appeared, the head of the Wu clan ran over and greeted him with a smile. The other two representatives, including Wei Jie and the Skyspan Trading Company, all rose from their chairs. This was the respect a junior had for a senior. I didn't want to come at first, but when I thought about my precious grandson's marriage, I decided to come. What, don't you want me to come over? The stooped Kai Tong smiled faintly. His voice wasn't soft at all. Whether it was the younger generation of the Wu clan, the spectating aristocratic families, or the peak powers, everyone heard him clearly. Marriage? The Wu family and the Kai family are going to have a marriage alliance? The spectating aristocratic families glanced at each other, shock in their eyes. The Liu family head and city lord W.N.G. Lei, who hadn't stepped forward to greet Kai Tong, glanced at each other. Both could see the seriousness in each other's eyes. Marriage. If it was just a business partnership, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if a marriage was involved, then the relationship between the two families was no small matter. Elder Kai, what are you saying? I couldn't have asked for more. It's too hot here. Hurry up and take a seat in the pavilion. The head of the Wu family helped Kai Tong to the pavilion on the east side. The city lords, Wei Jie, and the others, who were standing with their hands behind their back, all greeted Kai Tong respectfully. Don't worry about this, old man. Go about your business. Right, where's my granddaughter-in-law? Bring her over so I can see her. Kai Tong smiled as he took a seat. The Wu family head hurriedly called someone over and whispered a few words into his ear. Then, the man vanished from sight. City Lord W.N.G. Lei and the Liu family head sat back down, their minds clouded. The Wu family head exchanged a few more pleasantries with Kai Tong, then sat back down. He smiled calmly at the two old captains, then waved at the Wu family elder in the center of the arena. Assemble! The elder in the middle of the arena shouted. In an instant, the younger generation of the Wu family gathered around the elder. Let's go as well. Wu Di, who'd been sitting in the corner all this time, stood up. However, Zheng Yunan grabbed his hand from behind. Wu Di, I want to ask you one last time. You should know what I want to ask you. Zheng Yunan stared intently into Wu Di's eyes. Wu Di instinctively avoided her burning gaze and fell silent. All right then, I'll return this hairpin to you. A bitter smile tugged at Zheng Yunan's lips. She plucked a jade-green hairpin from the crown of her head and shoved it into Wu Di's palm. Wu Di's hand trembled as he grasped the hairpin. By the time he came to his senses, he discovered that Zheng Yunan had already been taken away by one of the clan's retainers. That's my Kai family's granddaughter-in-law. Kai Tong had been watching the events unfold from his chair. When he saw the Wu family head's messenger appear at Zheng Yunan's side, he immediately realized that she was the Kai family's granddaughter-in-law. In all of the arena, Zheng Yunan was the only person he'd taken a liking to. Whether it was in terms of appearance, she was top-notch. That's right, Elder Kai. That girl's name is Zheng Yunan. She's the granddaughter of our Wu family's first retainer, Zheng Chenggong. Old Zheng's granddaughter. Elder Kai smiled in understanding. The Zheng family really does everything they can for your Wu family. Zheng Chenggong's two sons died for your Wu family, didn't they? And now his granddaughter is going to be sacrificed for the sake of our two families. This old Zheng. Kai Tong's words were very straightforward. To put it bluntly, this marriage was an opportunity for both parties to work together. It wasn't a marriage of mutual consent. It was simply a marriage between two families. This was a bit unfair to Zheng Chenggong. The Zheng family had served the Wu family since 1,000 years ago. It could be said that the Zheng family played a significant role in the Wu family's current status. If there were even the slightest possibility the Wu family head wouldn't have used Zheng Yunan to form a marriage alliance. Unfortunately, there wasn't a single woman in the Wu family's direct line of descent who could catch the Kai family's eye. Helpless, he could only sacrifice Zheng Yunan. That's fine. If Ren Fei marries this girl, old Zheng and I will become in-laws. When we were both young, old Zheng and I were quite close. Kai Tong smiled faintly. Soon after, his turbid eyes narrowed. However, this sentence caused the Wu family head's heart to sink into his throat. Then, he heard Kai Tong continue, his voice neither hurried nor slow. Chapter 1079. Elder, and me sensing Kai Tong's strange mood, the Wu family head's expression froze. He hurriedly tried to explain. The Wu family situation in Raging Flame City was far too awkward. Zheng Yunan and Kai Renfei's marriage was necessary for the family to make a comeback. Although he'd already discussed this matter with the Kai family head, Kai Tong's status in the family was too high. A single word from him could decide whether or not the marriage would go through. Everything was already in place. All that was left was for the world to see. He absolutely couldn't allow Wu Di's existence to ruin the family's future. Elder Kai, there's no need to worry about that. Yunan and he were childhood playmates. There's no way they would have any romantic feelings for each other. I can guarantee this with my life. The Wu family head's expression was a bit nervous. Kai Tong sat in his chair, a faint smile in his murky eyes. Wen Guang, it's not that I don't believe you, but from what I saw just now, it seems they weren't just childhood playmates. Wen Guang was the Wu family head's name. When he heard Elder Kai's words, Wu Wenguang felt a bit conflicted. Wu Di was his son. Although he was practically invisible in the family, he'd been forced to send his son to Black Ox Town out of fear of the Li family. However, Wu Di's existence was no accident. He and the Li family's young miss had merely been connected by marriage. They didn't have much affection for each other. On the other hand, he and Wu Di's mother had loved each other since childhood. Unfortunately, their statuses were far too different. Even after her death, he hadn't been able to see her one last time. In truth, he'd secretly paid close attention to Wu Di. Although he couldn't make him rich and powerful, he could at least ensure his survival in this whirlpool. Now that Elder Kai was clearly unhappy with Wu Di, he had to make a choice between the future of the family and the son he loved. Elder Kai, why don't we watch the clan's grand competition first? Unable to make a decision, Wu Wenguang smiled apologetically and changed the topic to the clan's grand competition. Kai Tong was an ancient freak who'd lived for centuries. If he couldn't see through Wu Wenguang's intentions, he'd have lived for nothing. However, he didn't press the issue. Instead, he calmly nodded and ignored him. He believed that Wu Wenguang would give him a satisfactory answer in front of his clansmen and family. Wei Jie silently committed every word to memory. Yi Zichen had warned him repeatedly that Wu Di was his apprentice. He'd come to ensure Wu Di's safety during the competition. From Kai Tong's tone, it was clear that he didn't like Wu Di. Wei Jie's expression turned serious. They had already provoked the Axe Gang. If they provoked the Kai family as well, while everyone was having their own thoughts, the Wu family's grand competition was proceeding in an orderly manner. With the existence of the spirit steel, the large competition progressed much faster than expected. Although the strength of the younger generation was not bad, there was not a single dazzling existence that appeared. Out of all the clansmen who had been tested, the strongest was Wu Hai, the hot topic of the branch family. Early entering immortal. To be able to become an immortal before the age of 30 was already a top-tier talent. However, if one considered the entire Mortal Great District, or even the profound Great District, this sort of strength wasn't all that eye-catching. Wu Chong. When the elder called out Wu Chong's name, Wu Chong, who'd long since been itching to try, walked up to the spirit steel with ease. He pressed his hand against the steel, which flashed with light. Mid-stage, entering immortality. Wu Chong leisurely returned to his previous position after hearing the elder mention his strength. On his way back, he glanced at Wu Hai a few times, whether intentionally or not. Despicable. Wu Hai clenched his fists. In terms of spiritual energy density, he naturally couldn't compare to the family head son. He'd always had pills to support his cultivation. Even Big Brother Hai lost? I'm afraid we're just here to accompany the crown prince in this competition. The other Wu family juniors all chimed in. Of the several dozen remaining Wu family juniors, not a single one had surpassed the entering immortality stage. All right, after this test, Wu Chang, the elder in front of the spirit tablet, was just about to announce the news of Wu Chang's victory when an indifferent voice rang out from the crowd. Elder, me too. The surrounding Wu family juniors looked in his direction. When they saw who it was, they froze. Isn't that Wu Di? When did he get here? How come I didn't notice? He was sitting with Zheng Yunan just now. You probably didn't notice. But what's he trying to do now? Crown Prince Wu Chang's victory is already set in stone. Can he surpass the mid-stage, entering immortality stage? Does this count as a struggle for heirlooms? Don't forget, Wu Di is also the family head's son. Someone in the crowd spoke up, but when they heard this, they simply laughed it off. Wu Di probably didn't have the qualifications to participate in the struggle for heirlooms. The elder who'd been called back frowned. His true identity was that of a member of the Li family, so he naturally didn't treat Wu Di well. In truth, Wu Di's name was on the list, but he just skipped it. The elder hadn't expected this brat to say it of his own volition. He glowered at Wu Di. Name? This junior is Wu Di. Wu Di bowed deeply and politely. The elder nodded indifferently, then snorted. Do you think you can surpass the mid-stage, entering immortality stage? I wouldn't dare, but since this is the clan's grand competition, I have to participate. At the very least, I can see how strong I am compared to the rest of the Wu family's younger generation. Wu Di's reply was neither servile nor overbearing. His attitude stunned quite a few of the Wu family's younger generation. Perhaps they knew too little about Wu Di. Their impression of him was that he was a timid youth who was unsociable and unsociable. He never conversed with them. Yet now, despite the elder's pressure, he could speak in such a neutral tone. This was truly remarkable. This youth isn't bad. Wei Jia, who'd been watching the ceremony, took the opportunity to praise him. After all, Yi Zichen had asked Wu Di to be protected. Since Wei Jia was here and knew the Kai family was plotting against him, he naturally couldn't remain silent. Praising Wu Di at a critical juncture like this was a slap in Kai Tong's face. As expected, when Kai Tong heard Wei Jia's praise, his expression darkened, but he said nothing. All right, then come and try. The elder took a step back. Wu Di took a deep breath, circulated his spiritual energy to his arms, and pressed them against the tablet. Do you think he can do it? What if Wu Di really does surpass Wu Chang? Humph. So long as I can screw that crown prince, I'll be happy. The Wu family's younger generation discussed the matter heatedly. The people by Wu Hai's side frowned. Big Brother Hai, what do you think? Who knows? But if he really does surpass the mid-stage human immortal stage, I'd be happy to see that happen. Chapter 1080. Uninitiated Wu Di stood in front of the spirit steel, his heart thumping wildly. He'd waited so many years for this day to amaze the entire Wu family with a single brilliant feat. So long as he made it into the top 10 of the competition, he could bring his mother back to the clan's ancestral hall. So long as he made it into the top 10, he might even be able to live in the same world as Zheng Yunan. All these years, he had been waiting for this day. The jade hairpin was still tightly grasped in his hand. As he stood in front of the spirit tablet, he repeatedly breathed in and out. Soon after, his expression hardened, and his hand fiercely slammed towards the spirit tablet. After a long while, the inscriptions on the steel didn't change at all. It was as if no spiritual energy had been infused into it. It was dim and lifeless. The surrounding Wu family juniors were dumbfounded. Of all the people who'd taken the test, nothing like this had ever happened. Wu Di, uninitiated. Uninitiated meant that he was either a body refiner or a false spiritual body. His body was still pure power, and he hadn't absorbed any spiritual energy. The steel was called a spirit steel because, naturally, it would only change if he had spiritual energy. If he didn't have a spiritual energy, he'd be the same as before. Uninitiated? Haha, uninitiated. Quite a few Wu family juniors laughed uproariously. Wu Chang, who'd originally been worried about Wu Di, pursed his lips and chuckled. As expected, this maidservant girl's son was trash from the moment he was born. The disciples who didn't know what was going on laughed wantonly. But among them, there were 3 people who frowned: Li Kai, Zheng Yunan, and Wu Hai. They knew the first 2 were at least entering immortality. Wu Hai, on the other hand, sensed Wu Di's aura and didn't think he was a false spiritual body. There was obviously something shady going on. They knew this, but that didn't mean everyone else did. Wu Di stood in the center of the arena like a clown. His eyes flickered as he looked at his trembling hands. How could this be? Why did all his spiritual energy vanish just now? This was impossible. TCH. Why is it that no matter where I go, I always run into those old farts? The older they get, the more shameless they become. At that moment, a playful chuckle echoed through the sky. Everyone looked up into the sky and saw a white-robed Yi Zichen floating through the air. He floated towards them. Master! Even when he saw Yi Zichen, Wu Di looked as if he'd lost his soul. His spiritual power was all gone. The spiritual power that he had painstakingly cultivated for more than 20 years was all gone. It didn't feel like his spiritual sea was sealed. If his spiritual sea was sealed, he would still be able to feel the existence of his spiritual sea. Right now, he felt as if his spirit sea had disappeared. Who are you? How dare you barge into the Wu family? The Wu family elder roared, then clawed at Yi Zichen. Don't you hear Wu Di calling me master? When the elder heard this, he did not stop. With his strength, how could he not hear it? He was just pretending not to hear it. A few days ago, he'd learned from the mist that Wu Di had a master who was stronger than a human immortal. It was very difficult for the Li family to deal with Yi Zichen, and the elder didn't feel like he could do anything to Yi Zichen. Even so, he'd attacked Yi Zichen regardless of the consequences, all for the sake of forcing Yi Zichen to retaliate and heavily injure him. If he forced the Li family into a corner, the Wu family would definitely retaliate, and Wu Di might even be expelled from the family. His plan was good, but all of this was predicated on the Wu family being strong enough to resist Yi Zichen. If Yi Zichen's strength exceeded the Wu family's limits, then everything would be for naught. Playing deaf, Yi Zichen smiled coldly, then reached out and viciously slapped the elder across the face. The instant Yi Zichen attacked, the elder spun in a circle, spat out a mouthful of blood, and crashed through the arena's walls. The Wu family juniors on the training grounds immediately stood to the side, protected by the clan elders. They stared at Yi Zichen, who stood in the middle of the training grounds, in astonishment. Who's that? He's too ruthless. He sent elderly flying with a single slap. That's Wu Di's master. Didn't you hear him shout? Wu Di's really lucky. To think he found such a fierce master. But I don't think there's any way to resolve this peacefully. Elderly is a member of the Li family. He's no pushover. That slap isn't just a slap to the Li family's face. It's a slap to our Wu family's face as well. Li Na's expression was dark as she hid in the crowd. So this was that little bastard Wu Di's master? Earlier, he'd gone to the Axe Gang to get rid of him. But in just a few days, the Axe Gang had vanished without a trace, and upheaval had taken over. She thought there was no way to get rid of him, but now he'd slapped the Wu and Li families in the face. She feared he and Wu Di wouldn't have a good ending. Thinking of this, she smiled sinisterly. The other parties also looked at this scene in shock. As soon as Yi Zichen appeared, Wei Jie wanted to welcome him. However, he received a transmission from Yi Zichen telling him not to come over. Based on his understanding of his boss, he knew there was going to be a good show to watch. The Skyspan Assembly's enforcer took out a portrait. It was none other than Yi Zichen. That's the person the young lady told me to take care of. I'd like to see just who he is for the young lady to value him so much. Elderly. Instantly, several Wu family elders surrounded Yi Zichen. They looked at him solemnly. There were also a few elders who landed beside Elderly to check on his condition. Yi Zichen rubbed his neck as he looked at the Wu family elders, who were on guard, and smiled in a relaxed manner. This way of treating guests is a bit special. Yi Zichen didn't care about them at all. He casually strolled up to the spirit steel, and the elders instinctively made way for him. Protect the steel. At that moment, another angry shout rang out. A dozen or so human immortals and above appeared in front of the steel, blocking its path. There was even an earth immortal among them. The steel is our Kai family's supreme treasure. If you don't want to die, hurry up and leave, roared the earth immortal expert. When Yizichin heard that, he scratched his head. Since it's a supreme treasure, why don't you send some powerful people to protect it? You salted fish. Why are you jumping around blindly in front of me? His gaze instantly turned cold, and he waved his right hand. Scram! Yizichin slapped all the Kai family experts in front of the steel, including the earth immortal expert, into the walls of the arena. Blood seeped out of their mouths. Yizichin walked over to the steel, glanced at it briefly, then turned around. In everyone's eyes, he'd become a star of calamity. With a single glance, the Wu family elders and retainers all revealed nervous expressions. Don't be nervous. I have a good temper.